Chapter 224. When the dull drums echoed clearly on the border, General Wang Wantian, the commander of the Blood Battalion, also walked out of the tent and came behind Dongqing Wudi. Wang Wantian, dressed in military uniform, stood tall and straight. The golden general star shone in the sunlight. He stood upright behind Dongqing Wudi with a solemn expression, looking determined and decisive, full of murderous intent. Murderous intent. This was something that had been injected into everyone since the establishment of the Border Praetorian Corps, and it was carried forward in Dongqing Wudi's hands. For many years, the Border Control Corps could be said to be the most bloodthirsty army in the world. Have they arrived yet? The drums vibrated in the air. Dongqing Wudi, who was also in military uniform, had put down the drumsticks and turned to ask Wang Wantian behind him. They're all on the way. Wang Wantian nodded and said, I just called Han Bing. He should be able to arrive first. General Wang Wantian, the commander of the Blood Battalion. General Shi Hanbing, the commander of the Wild Sand Battalion. General Xiao Dongzhan, the commander of the Pegasus Battalion. General Cheng Huaining, the commander of the Black Dragon Battalion. These four, together with Thunder God, the deputy commander of the Thunderbolt Battalion from the Dongqing clan, could be said to be the strongest 5 tiger generals in Dongqing Wudi's hands and one of the pillars of the entire Border Control Corps. When the entire Border Control Corps was under international public opinion, no one expected that Dongqing Wudi not only remained unmoved, but also directly conveyed a secret military order to let the commanders of the other 3 legions rush to the Nanyun border overnight. However, such news could not be kept a secret. It might be leaked in one day at the latest. One day later, where would they be? Wang Wantian was in a daze and subconsciously looked at Dongqing Wudi in front of him. It seemed that the marshal did not want to hide such news from the beginning. Pass the order. Dongqing Wudi's cold voice sounded in front of him. Wang Wantian stood up straight reflexively. At this moment, the general who was also famous in Zhongzhou State, seemed to have become the rash young man who charged recklessly after receiving Dongqing Wudi's order many years ago. Let Shi Hanbing come to see me. Cheng Huaining goes to line 2. And Xiao Dongzhan to line 3. Don't take the initiative to attack unless there are special circumstances. Dongqing Wudi said slowly. Wang Wantian responded instinctively. Then he asked blankly, Marshal, are we going to make a move now? After all, Dongqing Wudi arrived at the Blood Battalion in a hurry. When the news of the Scorpion organization of Annan State reached Zhongzhou State, Dongqing Wudi rushed over as soon as possible, but it only took him 2 days. So many arrangements were made in a hurry and even a little rough. He only made a general arrangement. Nearly 200,000 people of the Blood Battalion had been scattered on the border of Nanyun and were simply divided into several key points. The headquarters of the Blood Battalion was the #1 point, with the fewest personnel left behind, but the most heavy firepower. The west side of the border was point 2, and the east side was point 3. The number of people was roughly equal. 3 points, more than 100,000 people, had firmly guarded the territory of Zhongzhou State. The 10,000 elites of the Thunderbolt Battalion led by Dongqing Wudi were at the forefront. They were not responsible for guarding, but taking the initiative to attack. Therefore, Dongqing Wudi called in the commanders of the other 3 legions and left Wang Wantian and Shi Hanbing at the forefront. Shi Hanbing and Wang Wantian followed Dongqing Wudi the earliest, and their strength was also the strongest. Both of them were very close to Dongqing Wudi's strength. The 3 masters, plus the 10,000 elites of the Thunderbolt Battalion, formed the sharpest knife on the border of Nanyun. Now the commanders of the other 3 legions had arrived at the border. With the 3 of them in place, everything seemed to be ready. It's not us who are going to move. It's them. Dongqing Wudi sneered and pointed to the direction of Annan State outside the border. His eyes were bloodthirsty and cold. He looked up at the rising sun in the east, took a deep breath, and whispered, It's the 5th day. If we don't move now, they won't have time. Damn it! Wang Wantian clenched his fist, and the dazzling blue lightning bloomed in his palm. In a trance, it seemed to overwhelm the sun on the horizon. Those people are so damn shameless. How dare they put pressure on us at the United Nations? Bullshit. Bad intentions? Who on earth has bad intentions? What are they? Who doesn't know that the Scorpion organization was subdued by Annan State several years ago? The whole Scorpion organization has been F*King reorganized into the Scorpion Corps. Rebellion? F*CK them. Enough, Dongqing Wudi said in a very low tone. His whole body was bathed in the rising golden sun, and his expression could not be seen. Wang Wantian shut his mouth with hatred. The Scorpion Rebellion is a rebellion. Now the northern forces of Annan State are empty. That's a fact, Dongqing Wudi said blandly. But they are not empty at all. The northern army did not move at all, but... Wang Wantian shouted with a fiery temper. You stubborn donkey. It's none of your business whether the Scorpion organization rebelled or not. If Annan State says there is a rebellion, then there is a rebellion. Isn't it normal for them to transfer troops from the north to suppress the rebellion? As for who and how many people will appear in the north of Annan State, it's none of Annan State's business. They have limited energy, so they are busy suppressing the rebellion. You have to tell the truth, you know. Do you think the international public opinion is not lively enough? A helpless voice suddenly rang out behind Wang Wantian. It was cold and indifferent. In the sun, a tall, thin and somewhat slender figure came slowly. He glanced at Dongqing Wudi, who had a smile at the corner of his mouth. He gave a military salute and said respectfully, Marshal. Shi Hanbing was just like his name. He was cold and expressionless. He had an unapproachable aura all over his body. Even in front of his immediate superior and old brothers, the indifference on his body only melted a little. Damn ice block. Who are you calling stubborn donkey? Don't I understand what's going on? I just can't bear it. Wang Wantian stared at him and swore. That's enough. Dongqing Wudi waved his hand. Annan State is in the north. Ah no, how many troops does the Scorpion have in the north of Annan State? It was a bit inappropriate, but Wang Wantian answered honestly, about 90,000 Annan State troops. Dongqing Wudi glanced at him and said nothing. Now there are no troops in the north of Annan State, only the rebels of the Scorpion. Shi Hanbing reminded him calmly. Bullshit. Wang Wantian snorted. Do you really think you're different after changing the flag? They haven't even changed the equipment of the base. I can call them whatever I want. Time is short. We don't have time to arrange too much, and neither does Annan State. But stubborn donkey, if you don't want to get into trouble, you have to admit that they have nothing to do with Annan State. No matter how many people we kill today, they are the rebels of the Scorpion. Shi Hanbing's tone was flat. I just don't know how many chips those people have given Annan State. Can they really afford such a big gamble? The Polar Ground Alliance, the Heroes Club, the Zhang family of South America, the Fantasy World, and Knights Templars, these 5 forces together, what chips can't they give? If necessary, Annan State is likely to say that all its troops are rebels. But now it seems that they still want to save face, so they didn't go too far. Dongqing Wudi said blandly, but the number is not small. 90,000 people, plus the elites of the 5 forces. Maybe they think it's enough? Marshal, they don't come with good intentions. Shi Hanbing reminded him in a serious tone. The final battle of Chongdao had broken out, and the power of Zhongzhou State was now completely scattered. There were people of Zhongzhou State in Northern Europe, North America, and East Island. It was hard to say how much extra power Zhongzhou State had to pay attention to the border. Now it was the 5th day of the 7 days. The 5 forces took advantage of the scattered power of Zhongzhou State to plot the border. They would do anything. As long as they succeeded, they could even give up the interests of East Island. For the 5 forces, the best way was to end the war quickly and decide everything in 1 or 2 days. Otherwise, when the Battle of Chongdao was over and Zhongzhou State withdrew part of its power, everything would be too late. After all, this was different from the final Battle of Chongdao. When Zhongzhou State plotted against East Island, the Dark Forces were the first to take action, but the 5 forces were directly attacking the army of Zhongzhou State with the help of the rebels. This was completely different. Zhongzhou State didn't need to pay attention to any means or rules to deal with the rebels and invaders. Therefore, in 2 days, they had to occupy Nanyun province and at least completely swallow the blood battalion of nearly 200,000 people. This was the common demand of the 5 forces. Now the final battle of Chongdao had reached a critical moment. Once the war broke out at the border of Zhongzhou State, it could not only restrain the experts of Zhongzhou State who wanted to go to Chongdao for support, but also put great psychological pressure on the people of Zhongzhou State in North America and Northern Europe. This was the conspiracy of the 5 forces. Even at the border, Zhongzhou State, which had the home advantage, might not be able to gain any advantage. It was no exaggeration to say that once the war started, the 4 battlefields would be full of variables. However, the biggest variable was not in these 4 battlefields. "Marshal, are the higher-ups ready?" Shi Hanbing asked in a low voice. "Yes, but the opponents are not idle. We can only fight to the death." Dongqing Wudi shook his head and sighed. Shi Hanbing moved the corner of his mouth and murmured, "The most important thing is Huating. Huating. Huating." Wang Wantian's body shook violently. At this time, Huating seemed calm and peaceful, but inside Huating, there were 5 invincible realm experts and countless foreign elites. Zhongzhou State was close to its limit by dividing 3 battlefields. If the border conflict broke out, how much power could Zhongzhou State spare to support the Border Control Corps? Too little didn't work. If there were too many, what about Huating? The general trend was in chaos. Maybe Dongqing Wudi was right. Even if they were prepared, under the change of the general trend, all they could do was to fight to the death. Chapter 225. The spear was awe-inspiring. It stood quietly on the ground, but it had a kind of spirit to roar between heaven and earth. It was an extraordinary spear. The spear was nearly 3 meters long, and its entire body was jet black. It was huge and heavy, and its black body was engraved with dense embossed patterns that extended from the butt of the spear all the way to the barrel, and then back again. The complicated patterns were connected to the exceptionally huge trigger, and it was done in one go, as smooth as flowing water. An extraordinary spear. An earth-shaking spear. It was not ferocious or domineering, but it had an irresistible majesty. A big slender hand held the spear. The large sniper rifle, nearly 3 meters long, was raised by one hand and pointed to the distant sky outside the window. With a spear in hand, it shot into the sky. The invincible spear and the invincible man were the best in the world. Good spear. An old sigh with a smile came from behind. My nephew's greatest wish in his life is to develop a real famous gun. We have mad shot and sky attack, but they are all failures. There is still a long way to go before we can develop a real famous gun. What can be used is the best. Although a famous gun is strong, how many people can exert its greatest power? Even I can pull the trigger, but the trigger can't be pressed to the bottom. I can't exert its greatest power. It's a pity in my life. For hundreds of years, it must be the loneliest. Wang Tianzong stroked the big black spear in his hand gently. The black sniper rifle glowed, and the body of the spear seemed to be slightly distorted. The complicated patterns were also gently fluctuating and turning into other shapes. Famous guns are all alive. How can it be possible to force it with a dead thing? Wang Tianzong held the big black spear in his hand and continued to speak. My old man doesn't understand these things. Let him study it. At least it's not a bad thing. Dongqing Hongguang, who was standing behind Wang Tianzong, said with a smile. Wang Tianzong smiled and said no more. The patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. The old patriarch of the Dongqing clan. The two standing together had an extraordinary meaning for the whole Zhongzhou state. In fact, when the 7-day period of East Island spread to Zhongzhou state, the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City had already started a series of contests. Although the contest was short, it was quite fierce. The final result was finally determined on the morning of the 5th day. Wang Tianzong appeared beside Dongqing Hongguang, while Gu Xingyun stayed in Huating. The winner and loser were clear. But it was still hard to say who suffered a loss, the Wang family of Beihai or Kunlun City. Old master, did I disappoint you by appearing here? Wang Tianzong turned around with a faint smile on his face and chuckled. Is there any difference? Is there? Dongqing Hongguang said calmly. Having retired for many years, the old master didn't care about worldly affairs, so he didn't beat around the bush. He was surprisingly frank. Neither you nor Gu Xingyun are the candidates I want. I don't. Two of you. And two. And I have you both of you. And An and I and you. There is still a difference. Wang Tianzong looked out of the window calmly. I know who you are thinking of. Situ Tsangyue is not in Zhongzhou state. Even if she is, she may not be able to survive this battle. In contrast, I think I am the most suitable choice. Dongqing Hongguang shook his head and said with a smile, maybe. Over the border of Nanyun, the helicopter flew at a low altitude, and the huge whistling sound of the rotors surged in the wind. Looking down through the cabin window, the large canopy of the primeval forest below rose and fell like waves as the helicopter moved forward. Who do you think will come this time? Dongqing Hongguang asked suddenly. Who knows? In such a big game, the one who comes will definitely come back, and it's a big guy. We can't know who it is until we see it. Wang Tianzong responded casually. You are confident. Dongqing Hongguang's tone was indifferent. It was hard to tell whether he was sighing with emotion or mocking. Wang Tianzong said softly in a calm tone, I am invincible. Dongqing Hongguang snorted. He seemed to want to refute something, but he didn't know how, so he could only close his eyes and rest. Why are you angry, old master? Although the Wang family of Beihai took advantage of the Dongqing clan this time, there will always be returns in the future. Brother Invincible won't be able to stay in the Border Control Corps for long, right? The Wang family of Beihai is willing to contribute to the future layout. Wang Tianzong suddenly smiled and said in a sincere tone. Dongqing Hongguang didn't open his eyes, but said in a cold tone, if Gu Xingyun were here, I'm afraid he would give more. Indeed. Wang Tianzong agreed and said with a chuckle, but it's a pity that he can't come. In the three-party game, Old Master has gained enough. Why do you take it seriously? We've already given out enough. Dongqing Hongguang sneered and said with no expression, if the Dongqing clan had an invincible realm expert, why would they take advantage of you now? The martial arts of the Dongqing clan specializes in killing intent, and there was indeed a famous figure in the dark world. In fact, it should be your father's generation, right? But later, you integrated the martial arts of Jade Pool and wanted to integrate killing intent and outburst. Now it seems that the effect is not so good. Maybe it has. It's not conclusive yet. Dongqing Hongguang interrupted Wang Tianzong. It's just 2 generations. The Dongqing clan will definitely have the strongest invincible realm expert, either now or in the future. Really? Wang Tianzong asked with a smile, but his eyes were shining with inexplicable brilliance. Dongqing Hongguang seemed to realize that he had said something wrong. His face changed slightly, and he glared at Wang Tianzong without saying anything. The helicopter flew over the primeval forest and quickly approached the border. They're coming. Wang Tianzong looked out of the window and suddenly said. In his sight, the 10,000 Thunderbolt Battalion led by Dongqing Wudi had appeared in front of him. Farther away, through the primeval forest, standing on the helicopter and looking down, countless dense figures were constantly rushing forward. Countless figures were reuniting one after another. It was the territory of Annan State, but the vanguard troops had entered the border of Zhongzhou State. It was mighty. Like a black tide. Dongqing Hongguang was already standing beside Wang Tianzong, looking at the black tide at the end of his sight with a solemn expression. I'm going. Wang Tianzong said slowly. He opened the door of the cabin and jumped down without hesitation. The wind was cold in the air. The black big spear in his hand was constantly deformed, broken, and twisted in the violent wind. The unknown black metal changed very quickly. Finally, the big spear disappeared, and in Wang Tianzong's hand, there was a ferocious-looking black arm guard. His body fell to the ground, and he looked at the arm guard on his right hand that covered his whole arm, expressionless. The 5 superpowers in the dark world conspired to the border of Zhongzhou State and even used Annan State. This move made it clear that they wanted to annex the entire Blood Battalion and even Nanyun Province. Such a big plot. There must be a final figure. Knowing that he and Gu Xingyun were in Zhongzhou State, such a final figure was definitely a top enemy on the divine list. Wang Tianzong's biggest task in coming to the border this time was to kill the invincible realm expert pushed out by the 5 superpowers. As long as the opponent died, it would be time for Zhongzhou State to fight back. The general trend was turbulent. A slight tilt of the delicate balance was enough to affect the outcome. Wang Tianzong calmly stroked the black arm guard on his hand. The murderous weapon was in his hand. He was fearless. This black big spear and this black arm guard were the most precious weapons of the Wang family of Beihai. It ranked first among the 12 murderous weapons in the dark world. The spear was named Human Emperor. The black tide rushed to the border. Tens of thousands of people charged from different directions, and the entire border jungle was shaking. But there was dead silence in front of Dongqing Wudi. The 10,000 elites of the Thunderbolt Battalion had already assembled. People all over the mountains stood in front of Dongqing Wudi in silence. Only their fanatical eyes were focused on Dongqing Wudi. There was no fear, only the most unyielding fighting spirit. Dongqing Wudi stood calmly under the war drum of the family and country. His face was calm. The footsteps at the border rushed over like a landslide and a tsunami, getting closer and closer. Vigorous and vigorous. Dongqing Wudi, who had been silent, finally took a step forward. There was no blood-boiling speech. His voice was very calm, and within the calmness, there was a kind of craziness that was suppressed to the extreme. If the armed forces of other countries enter the border of Zhongzhou state, they are invaders. Dongqing Wudi said in a low voice, which was not loud but clearly sounded in everyone's ears. The enemy is coming. Thunderbolt Battalion. Follow me to kill the enemy. None of our enemies will survive. Kill. The 10,000 Thunderbolt Battalion roared at the same time, like a tsunami. To Zhongzhou State. Facing everyone, the most legendary marshal of Zhongzhou State picked up his kettle and looked solemn. To the marshal. The 10,000 Thunderbolt Battalion picked up their kettles at the same time and said in unison. Dongqing Wudi suddenly burst out laughing. He raised his head, poured all the liquor in the kettle into his mouth, and threw the kettle away. He turned around. In his sight, countless enemies rushed forward, all dressed in black. The vanguard troops had rushed into the forest. The mountains and plains were all covered with black clothes. They were armed to the teeth. Dongqing Wudi's eyes flashed with a trace of amazing killing intent, and he suddenly reached out his hand. Under the war drum of the family and country, the drumstick suddenly fell into Dongqing Wudi's hands. Dongqing Wudi strode forward, and the drumsticks fell on the war drum of the family and country with all their strength. The fierce drumming sounded throughout the border in an instant. The war drum was like thunder, and the sound wave that swept everything went straight into the sky and shook the clouds away. Dongqing Wudi's roar sounded in the drumming, with the heroism and fighting spirit from the soul, shaking the sky. Chapter 226. The Thunderbolt Battalion marched on. The Blood Battalion defended to the death. This was the plan that had been made from the beginning. The war this time could be said to be unexpected. Time was tight, and neither side was fully prepared. Once the real battle began, it would be a battle of fighting spirit. The scorching sun covered the barren mountains of the western region of Nanyun. Under the scorching sun, groups of soldiers of the Blood Battalion were busy shuttling back and forth. The military trucks at the foot of the mountains stopped and went. More and more heavy firepower weapons approached the barren mountains, and the whole mountain was in a solemn atmosphere. Lieutenant General Cheng Huaining, the commander of the Black Dragon Battalion, stood quietly on the top of the mountain and looked at the busy scene below with a solemn face. The general, who had been guarding the northeast border of Zhongzhou state all year round, did not look like a soldier at all. He was thin, elegant, and looked gentle. If he took off the prestigious military uniform, he would look more like a knowledgeable and gentle professor and scholar, or a Confucian general. The drums surged in the air like thunder. 13 family country drums sounded at the same time, covering the whole border of Nanyun. The drums were rough and heroic, with a kind of power that was enough to shake the soul. Cheng Huaining listened to the drums that were getting more and more intense. Instead of being excited, a layer of fine sweat appeared on his forehead, and he looked eager and anxious. Hurry up! The movements of the soldiers at the foot of the mountain were nervous but orderly. Cheng Huaining wiped the sweat on his forehead and whispered to himself. Huaining, the marshal has begun to exchange fire. In the war drums that shook the sky, a middle-aged man in the military uniform of a major general quickly passed through the busy crowd and rushed directly to the top of the mountain. It's not surprising. Cheng Huaining shook his head with a solemn face, pointed to the direction of the drums and said, Listen to the drums and you will know. Zijing, how much time do we need? The corner of the major general's mouth moved, and his face was a little gloomy and decadent. He was originally a very handsome man, but at this time, his face was indescribably ugly. About 3 hours. He gritted his teeth and whispered, It will take at least 2.5 hours for us to build a perfect line of defense. 2.5 hours. Cheng Huaining shook his head with a wry smile and said calmly, There is definitely not enough time. I know. Bai Zijing growled, his handsome face a little ferocious. But I know my troops. This is the fastest we can do. There's no better way. Bai Zijing, one of the core figures of the Bai family in the giant group of Zhongzhou state, was the commander of the 2nd Division of the Blood Battalion. The second division was a mountain combat division. Although its comprehensive strength was not the top in the Blood Battalion, its equipment configuration and daily training were most suitable for mountain combat. This place was infinitely close to the border. In front of it was a wasteland of Annan state, and behind it was a primeval forest. The rolling mountains in the middle were the most suitable battlefield for by Zijing and his second division. After a preliminary inspection of the terrain, Dongqing Wudi directly ordered by Zijing to lead the second division to form the first line of defense in the western region here. However, compared with the 5 dark forces, Zhongzhou State's preparation was still too inadequate. It took time to study the terrain, execute the battle plan, arrange the troops, mobilize the troops, and set up the defense line. Although the efficiency of the Border Control Corps was amazing, it involved more than 100,000 troops. After doing one thing after another, it finally came to this moment. Now most of the things had been done, except for the last step. Batch after batch of heavy firepower weapons were being transferred from the headquarters of the Blood Battalion, installed and erected, and finally formed an extremely powerful line of fire on the border. Once this work was done, it would be much easier to just defend, and the pressure on the entire border would be reduced. Unfortunately, they didn't have the time now. The 10,000 elites led by Dongqing Wudi were in front of them on the right. The vertical distance between the two sides was about 5 kilometers, not counting the left and right sides. At this time, the drums of the family country war shook the sky, which fully showed that Dongqing Wudi had begun to fight with the dark forces of the Martial Arts University. This also showed that in their direction, the enemy was also on the way to charge, and they were at most 5 kilometers away from here. After all, they could not charge in batches. In a time crunch, the other side would definitely press all at once. It would take the second division another 2.5 hours to build a perfect line of defense. But the enemy's rapid march of 5 kilometers, no matter how many people there were, could not take so long. At most, an hour would be enough. The remaining 1.5 hours was the most difficult test for Cheng Huaining and Bai Zijing. They had only 2 choices. The first was to use the lives of the soldiers of the second division to buy time and set up the line of fire. However, in this way, most of the troops of the second division would be transferred, and a small number of people would set up the line of fire, which was bound to take longer. As for whether it would succeed in the end, no one was sure. The second choice was to retreat now and give up this mountain. How to choose? Cheng Huaining's forehead was sweating more and more, but his eyes were still calm as ever. His eyes slowly swept over the mountains, and he was silent. This mountain range could be said to be the most favorable terrain in the western region. It was nearly 6 kilometers long, but both sides were peaks. The mountains were not high, but the slope was very steep, which could be said to be a natural stronghold. Only the slope where he was now had a slightly lower slope. If the enemy wanted to enter Zhongzhou State, this could be said to be the only way. However, this slope was only about 300 meters wide, and both sides were steep mountain walls. If he guarded here, it could be said that one man could hold the pass against 10,000 enemies. Such an important terrain could be said to be a battleground. From the beginning of the founding of the People's Republic to the past few decades, Zhongzhou State and Annan State had been in constant conflict over this place, and countless disputes, large and small, had broken out. For the western region of Nanyun in Zhongzhou State, this was completely a natural gateway, and they had to defend here even if they died. "We can't retreat." Cheng Huaining suddenly opened his mouth. His voice was very soft, but his calm eyes flickered with a light of determination. Bai Zijing suddenly raised his head and glared at Cheng Huaining. He opened his mouth but did not know what to say. "As long as we hold this place, we can buy time for several lines of defense in the rear. The enemy wants to invade from the western region. This is the only way, unless they are willing to take a detour of dozens of kilometers to step on the minefield that has existed for many years. Zijing, we are not ready, nor are the lines of defense in the rear. In any case, we can't retreat." Cheng Huaining's tone became calmer and calmer. "But if we retreat and they chase after us, it will also take time." Bai Zijing clenched his fists tightly and growled with a distorted face. "Stupid." Cheng Huaining's face darkened, and he said coldly, "This place is easy to defend and difficult to attack. If we really abandon this place, once the enemy enters the territory and scatters, there will be endless troubles in the future. And if we retreat without fighting, this place is equivalent to directly giving it to the enemy. Once the enemy occupies this place, how can they easily hand it over? At that time, The western region of Nanyun in Zhongzhou State may be bounded by this place. Even if we want to fight, don't you understand how much it will cost us in this terrain? If you feel sorry for your troops now, they will all be sacrificed sooner or later in the future. Bai Zhijing closed his eyes in pain, the corners of his mouth twitched, and he couldn't speak. How could he not understand the general principle? He didn't want to retreat either. Since the establishment of the Border Control Corps, there had never been a deserter, whether it was a big or a small battle. But in this situation, if he wanted to defend to the death and the line of fire had not been set up, he would be fighting with his troops. How many people in the 2nd Division would die in this battle? As long as he thought about it, Bai Zhijing's heart couldn't help but twitch. You know what you should do. Cheng Huaining took a deep look at Bai Zhijing and patted him on the shoulder with his big hand. If we retreat from here, our rear will be exposed. Although our place here is not as important as the main battlefield on the martial side, it is equally important. The enemy's target is the entire Blood Battalion. If we let them break in from here, the enemy will keep coming, and then the Blood Battalion will be in danger. If the Blood Battalion is really wiped out or severely damaged, even if we win in East Island, the gain will be limited. After all, there are nearly 160,000 people in the Blood Battalion. If they are gone, how can Zhongzhou State fill this hole? With what? By relying on those pampered elites in the inland? And don't forget, even if we win the final battle of Chongdao, we need to send people to guard. If the Blood Battalion is destroyed, the Snowdance Corps, which should be guarding in Chongdao, is likely to be used to fill the vacancy in the Blood Battalion. In the end, what can we get? There's also Huating. When the battle breaks out here, Huating will also be in danger. We're prepared, but the other side won't be idle. Otherwise, from the beginning of the final battle of Chongdao, we will regard it as the power of the whole country. In the general trend, everyone has to do their best. The international battlefield is full of smoke. No matter how much advantage you have, one wrong step often leads to the loss of the whole game. Zhijing, if we take one wrong step today, we may be the sinners of Zhongzhou State in the future. Don't you understand this? Cheng Huaining's tone became harsher and harsher, and an unparalleled power burst out of him. Bai Zhijing's body trembled uncontrollably. He clenched his fists and said in a hoarse voice, I understand. You don't have to say it. The 2nd Division will go up, and I will stand at the forefront and fight to the death. I will fight for time for the Blood Battalion and the western region of Nanyun with you. Cheng Huaining looked ahead with a gentle and elegant smile. At the end of his sight, a vast darkness gradually appeared on the Annan plain. Dust was rising, and the earth was shaking. Let me do it. An old and gentle voice suddenly rang out in the mountains. The voice was not high, gentle and quiet, but it rang clearly in everyone's ears, calm and confident. Cheng Huaining and Bai Zhijing, who were staring ahead with a serious face, suddenly turned around. In their sight was the vast forest, the constant transport vehicles, and the busy soldiers. But deep in the forest, there was a kind of momentum that could make all living beings tremble. It was surging and unparalleled in the world. An old star flag of Zhongzhou State appeared in everyone's sight. The flagpole, which was more than 10 meters long, was held in someone's hand. The cold wind blew in the forest, but the huge flag at the end of the flagpole was stagnant like a knife, motionless. The old man holding the star flag suddenly appeared. He walked out of the forest unhurriedly, but with every step, he crossed a distance of tens of meters and quickly approached the mountain range. That kind of trembling momentum kept rising, mighty in the valley of the western region, and the fighting intent soared to the 9th heaven. The scarlet flag, which was stagnant like a knife. The shabby clothes. The old face. The fighting intent soared to the 9th heaven. At this moment, the man in the flag seemed to fill the whole world. He was indomitable. Stop! The outermost patrol soldiers finally reacted. They subconsciously held up the guns in their hands and pointed at the old man. In the face of the great battle, an unidentified but ridiculously strong old man came to the battlefield alone with the star flag. This matter was weird. The patrol soldiers would never believe that the old man was one of them because of a flag in his hand. Who are you? Among the patrol soldiers, a first lieutenant held the gun in his hand tightly and looked at the old man in front of him calmly. I am. The old man held the flagpole and stood in front of the patrol team. His eyes seemed to be in a trance. I'm a veteran of Zhongzhou State. His eyes stared deeply at the mountain range ahead and he whispered, My name is Li Honghe. 19 years ago, my son was sacrificed in this mountain range in front of us. It was a sacrifice. When he said these two words, the old man's tone was particularly clear, with a kind of stubbornness. Li Honghe? The first lieutenant was stunned. He held the gun and muttered to himself subconsciously, It sounds a little familiar. Li Honghe smiled, grasped the flagpole in his hand and said calmly, More than 20 years ago, the Border Praetorian Corps was established at my suggestion. He ignored the dull soldiers and took a step forward. His figure had appeared directly at the foot of the mountain. He finally slowed down, but his momentum was rising. Cheng Huaining stared at the old man in front of him, his body trembling uncontrollably. He had never thought that he would actually see His Highness, who lived in seclusion at the border of the southern cloud, in such a scene today. He entered the invincible realm at the age of 38, killed 6 superiors of the invincible realm in his life, ranked first on the divine list for 10 years, fought hundreds of battles in his life, and never tasted defeat. He guarded Zhongzhou State, suppressed North America, dominated the African continent, looked down on the heroes of South America, and suppressed an era. That was the most glorious first half of his life. His radiance was boundless, and he was invincible. He was Li Honghe. He was the former god of war of Zhongzhou State. They were the veterans of Zhongzhou State today. It was the belief of everyone in this era. Cheng Huaining was in a trance. Vaguely, he seemed to have returned to more than 20 years ago, to the time when he had just joined the Border Praetorian Corps. At that time, he was standing beside another highness, and he was personally awarded the rank of lieutenant colonel by this highness. At that time, the face in front of him was not old, and every move he made was filled with vigor and domineering fierceness. At that time, he personally wore the insignia on his shoulder. He said with a smile, Young men are good. Do a good job and protect the country. That was the most glorious era of the Li family. That was the era when the Wang family of Beihai and the Li family joined forces, and the whole dark world was under their feet. When that era passed, when the light of the Li family dissipated, time rumbled silently and passed quickly. In the blink of an eye, nearly 20 years had passed. The former god of war of Zhongzhou State was no longer there. Now, what appeared in front of him was a white-haired veteran of Zhongzhou State. Grievance, helplessness, desolation, he fell from the peak to the dust, and from the god of war to a veteran. This old man had dedicated everything to Zhongzhou State. No matter what he had experienced, he had been silent from beginning to end, with no regrets. But the former god of war was no longer there. There was only a veteran holding a national flag. In his sight, Li Honghe was still walking slowly, from the foot of the mountain to the top. But Cheng Huaining did not know why his face was already full of tears. For the flag that had been worn out in 20 years of wind and frost. For the veteran in front of him. At this moment, Cheng Huaining was no longer the commander of the Black Dragon Battalion, nor was he a lieutenant general of Zhongzhou State. In front of this veteran who risked everything for Zhongzhou State, he was just a veteran. A veteran who joined the Border Control Corps in the first batch and had always existed and been fighting. The mountain wind was blowing, and the top of the mountain was silent. An agitated and crazed voice with a sobbing tone resounded on the peak of the mountain, as if it had exhausted all of its strength. Cheng Huaining, a veteran of the Border Control Corps, pays respect to your highness. Bai Zhijing, a veteran of the Border Control Corps, pays respect to your highness. Lu Chuanhai, a veteran of the Border Control Corps, pays respect to your highness. Fu Guoqiang, a veteran of the Border Control Corps, pays respect to your highness. On the top and the bottom of the mountain, one figure after another knelt on one knee on the way Li Honghe walked. They used all their strength and roared hoarsely. It was a kind of fanatical roar, close to faith. This was the oldest group of people in the 2nd Division. None of them had a military rank lower than lieutenant colonel. Everyone's military rank was higher than the current Li Honghe. But now they were just veterans. The flagpole in Li Honghe's hand shook slightly, and then froze again. Get up. Li Honghe walked slowly to the top of the mountain and said softly in a gentle tone, You're good. Everyone's faces were flushed with excitement, and they roared with all their might. We're willing to follow your highness to kill the enemy. No need. Li Honghe didn't look back. He passed by Cheng Huaining and Bai Zhijing, stood at the forefront of the top of the mountain, and said softly, Hurry up to build a line of defense. I'll block them, but my time is limited. You have to hurry up. Your Highness. Chang Huaning's voice trembled slightly, and Bai Zhijing's expression suddenly changed. You go and help too. Li Honghe chuckled and said in an unquestionable tone, hurry up. I don't have much time. Chang Huaning still wanted to say something, but Bai Zhijing beside him had already tugged at his sleeve and shook his head slightly. Li Honghe didn't look back and walked slowly down the hill alone. Dust rose from the wasteland in front of them. A large black mass of people rushed forward at full speed, like a black tide, surging forward majestically. The enemy had no flag and didn't wear military uniforms. Li Honghe couldn't tell who they were, and he didn't bother to identify them. No dark force could mobilize so many people on the border of Zhongzhou state. Most of them, no matter what their current identity was, were just a disguise. They had only one real identity. Li Honghe smiled and thrust the flagpole in his hand into the ground. The scarlet flag, which was more than 10 meters long, suddenly flew in the wind. At this moment, the mountain range behind Li Honghe and everything of the 2nd Division seemed to have completely disappeared. In everyone's sight, there was only the man and the flag that could almost hold up the sky. The wind instantly became piercingly cold. Li Honghe stood quietly under the flag. Behind him was the entrance of the mountain range, which was less than 300 meters away. He stood in the middle, and his seemingly weak body seemed to block the entire Zhongzhou state. The black tide ahead was getting closer and closer. Li Honghe's expression grew gentler. He was born in the best era. From childhood to old age, in this life, he carried not only the glory of the Li family, but also the pride of the Li family. The god of war of Zhongzhou state fought for the country. The obsession of the Li family was concentrated on him, and maybe it would disappear from him. Li Kuang-tu was an ambitious man of his generation. He might be willing to sacrifice everything for the Li family, but his character was destined not to be a soldier who would do anything to defend his family and country. He had ambition and desire. When he established the Border Control Corps, Li Honghe hoped that he could find his mission and responsibility in this pure atmosphere of iron and blood. But in the end, he didn't really commit treason, but he died. Li Tianlan's future was still uncertain. And his childhood experience also doomed him to be as loyal and stubborn as Li Honghe to guard the country. In the end, it seemed that Li Honghe was the purest of the 3 generations. Whether he was the god of war or a veteran, what he did was to protect the country. He had a clear conscience. Impartial. Never annoyed. I've been indecisive all my life. If I can die here in battle, it's my end. In the wind, Li Honghe whispered to himself, and his wise eyes were full of freedom. The black tide in front of them surged forward in a frenzy, as if it could topple mountains and overturn seas. It was unstoppable. Li Honghe's slightly stooped body suddenly straightened up and reached out to grab the flying flag. It swept across. The flag streaked across the cold wind and exploded in the wilderness like a thunderclap. The world trembled. A sword energy nearly 100 feet long rose to the sky in an instant. The boundless sword light rushed into the black tide formed by the crowd in front of them with an incomparably heroic momentum. The sky was about to collapse under the sword light. The vast sword light tore the sky apart, bringing with it a large amount of blood rain that rained down unscrupulously. The endless black tide rushed forward, stepping on the bodies of their companions, and the sound of killing shook the sky. Li Honghe waved the star flag in his hand wildly. One after another, the sword light as long as 100 feet rushed into the crowd, bursting out blood all over the sky. The wilderness was stained with blood. The flag was stained with blood. The sword light surged like a waterfall. The flag danced like a dragon. Fight to the death. Chapter 227. The light at the edge of the sky slowly closed in the sultry temperature. The long night was coming, and the sky at the end of the sight was oppressive black. In the alternating time of day and night, there was no dim setting sun in the distant sky of Huiting, only gloomy dark clouds. The dark clouds were getting lower and lower. Standing on the high ground of the Sky Academy and looking up, the dark clouds all over the sky seemed to be within reach. If you stared deeply, you could even vaguely see the blue lightning brewing inside the dark clouds. In the classroom on the top floor of the No. 3 teaching building of the Sky Academy, Zhuang Huayang looked through the window at the lower and lower dark clouds above. With a complicated expression, he sighed softly with some worry. It's going to rain tonight. It's normal for the weather to change. Headmaster Zhuang is also a person who has experienced storms and we have prepared umbrellas. Why should you worry? Yi Dongsheng, who was known as the god of army in Zhongzhou State, slowly came to Zhuang Huayang and said with a kind smile. The god of army of Zhongzhou State, who was born in the southeast group but was now highly relied on by all parties, looked a little ordinary. But at this time, dressed in a military uniform, his every move carried an indescribable spirit. It was not the arrogance and fierceness of a warrior, but the deep and elegant wisdom and calmness. It was simple, but it gave people a feeling that everything was under control. I'm getting old, and the older I get, the more timid I become. Zhuang Huayang laughed at himself, turned to look at Yi Dongsheng, and said with a smile, I'm not as confident as Marshal Yi. It's windy and rainy tonight, and our umbrellas are still a little small. I'm afraid that they will break. Yi Dongsheng smiled and squinted at the figure standing in front of another window. He said with a smile, Old Gu, did you hear that? The headmaster thinks your umbrella is not big enough. If you can't protect the Sky Academy tonight, the headmaster will get angry. Don't blame me for not reminding you. There's no other way. Gu Xingyun, who was also looking out of the window with a solemn face, said lightly, All the elites of Kunlun City have come out. Tonight, we will do our best and die without regret. If someone didn't want to preserve his strength, what's the big deal even if the wind and rain were 10 times stronger tonight? Yi Dongxing's expression did not change, and he said softly, Your Highness, you're too serious. Now everyone is going all out. How can there be any preservation of strength? Gu Xingyun's elegant and almost gentle face showed a sneer. He did not look back but asked sharply, Go all out? The Wang family of Beihai? The smile on Yi Dongxing's face gradually became faint, and even his tone became rigid, like an official statement without substance. His Majesty Sword Emperor has gone to the southwest border with the human emperor. With only one person and one spear, the Wang family of Beihai's contribution is no less than that of Kunlun City. Besides, Beihai province was vast and close to East Island. How could His Majesty show any flaws? The few elites were naturally left to guard the North Sea province. This was the tacit agreement of all the higher-ups. What could His Highness's sarcasm change? Are you afraid? Scared? Gu Xingyun suddenly turned his head and looked at Yi Dongsheng. His tone was very soft, but his eyes were extremely cold. You two, we've gone off topic. Zhuang Huayang stood aside with a smile and pointed out of the window. A strange light flashed in his deep eyes, and he sighed softly. The storm is coming. A muffled thunder suddenly rolled across the sky. The pale blue lightning tore through the night. The glass trembled in the thunder, and heavy rain swept across Huating without warning. Gu Xingyun and Yi Dongsheng did not say anything more. They turned around at the same time and looked at a screen in the room with a serious look. They were now in the largest classroom in the No. 3 teaching building, with an area of nearly 2,000 square meters. One of the 100-meter-wide walls was made into a super-large screen. At this time, the screen was lit up, and the scene looked extremely shocking. There were hundreds of computers arranged vertically in the classroom. As the rain fell, there were at least 2 military elites working busily in front of each computer. The clattering of the keyboard and the sound of the rain merged together, and the images on the big screen were constantly changing as the military elites worked busily. Gu Xingyun, Yi Dongsheng, and Zhuang Huayang all stared at the screen intently. However, the big screen had been divided into countless windows at this time, and the pictures on each window were turning like running water. Even if the three had amazing eyesight, their eyes still instinctively felt uncomfortable after watching for a while. On the whole big screen, the real-time pictures of every corner of Huating were jumping. Every street, every intersection, and every highway were changing constantly. The speed was so fast that it was dazzling. The big classroom was quiet for a while. The three stared at the screen in front of them tightly, for fear of missing any detail. The 5th day and night. This was the key of the key. At this time, Huating, from the urban area to the Sky Academy, had become one of the most heavily guarded places in the whole Zhongzhou state. The Sky Academy, in particular, was a combustible and explosive powder keg. The experts of the 5 forces who had come to the Sky Academy to watch the ceremony were all trapped here. Tianhai Wuji, the palace master of Wuji Palace, Luxing Cangchuan, the master of Jifeng Sword Training School, Jiang Qianyan, the second in command of the Jiang family of South America, Chaos, the commander of Knights Templars, Huan Kong, the master of Fantasy World. There were 5 experts of the Invincible Realm, not to mention the experts of the Thunder-Shocking Realm they brought. The Sky Academy had not been idle during this time. These people had special identities and were extremely honorable. Naturally, they could not be killed. Not to mention whether it would lose the demeanor of a superpower, even if Zhongzhou State did not care about it, it would be difficult for it to bear the consequences of killing them. They came to Zhongzhou State just to watch the ceremony. If they really died in Huiting, perhaps the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State would be unable to move within their sphere of influence in the future. After all the dark forces had intricate inside stories behind them. It was not kind to trap them. If they were really killed when they came to watch the ceremony, Zhongzhou State would have made countless enemies at once. However, although they could not be killed, Zhuang Huayang did not make them feel better. He invited Yu Donglai, one of the former sacred guards of the Li family, to the Sky Academy, and almost every day he tampered with their meals. Yu Donglai was known as the Poison Doctor and was famous throughout the dark world. When it came to using poison, he was definitely regarded as a guru. However, it was really difficult to poison 5 experts of the Invincible Realm and dozens of experts of the Thunder-Shocking Realm without being noticed. Even Yu Donglai tried his best to prepare the poison and carefully controlled the dosage. The poison concocted by Yu Donglai did little harm to the body and would only reduce their physical strength. But the most important toxicity was to erode the spirit. The spirit determined the will, and the will was as important as the strength in martial arts. If the will was not focused enough, the strength could not be exerted, and the combat capability was destined to be greatly reduced. This kind of poison was the most difficult to be noticed, but the shortcoming was that it took effect slowly. For many days, those prisoners with special identities had been eating this kind of poison every meal, but the effect was not great. The combat capability of the 5 experts of the Invincible Realm and those experts of the Thunder-Shocking Realm might decline, but not by much. At least the 5 experts of the Invincible Realm, even if they were not at their peak, their combat capability was definitely above the half-step Invincible Realm. This was already the maximum toxicity that the poison concocted by Yu Donglai could exert. Now Wang Tianzong had gone to the border of Zhongzhou State, and the master of Samsara Palace was said to have left the Sky Academy to heal her wounds in secret. Gu Xingyun was the only expert of the Invincible Realm in the entire Sky Academy. In the case that the defense of the Sky Academy was empty, even if the 5 experts of the Invincible Realm were not at their peak, they were still 5 horrible monsters for Zhongzhou State. If they took advantage of the chaos to break out, it would be a disaster for the entire Huiting. They might not know the situation inside the Sky Academy, but at this time, Huiting was also turbulent with undercurrents. After all, as Tianhai Wuji and Luxing Songchuan entered Zhongzhou State, a considerable part of the special warfare elites of East Island also lurked in Huiting. During this time, Kunlun City issued a search warrant, and the entire special warfare system searched in Huiting. Although many people were found, some escaped fish were still hiding in the dark. They were all in Huiting, facing an excellent opportunity. If the 2 sides wanted to get in touch, even in the Sky Academy, they could still find a way. Now it was the 5th day and night of the 7-day period. The 5 dark forces seemed to have secretly reached a tacit understanding with East Island. During this delicate period, the 5 forces joined forces with Annan State to invade the border of Zhongzhou State. As soon as Wang Tianzong left, the Sky Academy and Huiting suddenly lost a big deterrent force. If the hostile forces trapped in Huiting and the Sky Academy could really break out tonight, they could still reach Chongdao at this time. At that time, the final battle of Chongdao might be at the last moment, and these experts who broke out were enough to change the result of the final battle of Chongdao. Zhongzhou State was aware of the changes at the border, but it never thought that the changes at the border were actually caused by the 5 dark forces. This had never happened in the past decades, and the 5 forces could let go of their grievances and come together, which was enough to show their great determination and ambition. In the Battle of the Border, even figures of the Invincible Realm on the Divine List would appear. Wang Tianzong, who was originally in charge of Huiting, could only rush to the southwest border to save the situation. As soon as he moved, Huiting suddenly became empty. For a few days, the elites of Azura Path, Great Soaring Temple, Shadow Sect, Kunlun City, and other institutions could only rush to Huiting to replenish the strength of Huiting. And this group of people in the plan was originally the 3rd group of elites who rushed to East Island. Now they were used to defend Huiting, and East Island suddenly became a little weak. After all, This situation was too big and there were too many variables. It could be said that one move in one part could affect the whole situation. Zhongzhou State, which had a very obvious advantage in the first move, suddenly became weak as the 5 forces invaded the border. The original advantage was not only wiped out, but if they couldn't defend Huading tonight, when this group of hostile experts arrived at East Island, the whole situation would be completely reversed and become precarious. Once the worst happened, not to mention East Island, Zhongzhou State was bound to suffer a great loss of vitality. Not to mention expanding outward, even defending the homeland would be a problem. At that time, the superpowers would take the opportunity to invade Zhongzhou State, and maybe the Battle of Chongdao would happen again in Zhongzhou State. If things were really like this, then as the main promoter of the plot of East Island, Gu Xingyun would definitely be blamed, and the good situation would also be in vain. This might be the result that some people wanted to see, right? Staring at the screen in front of him, Gu Xingyun looked calm and elegant, but his eyes were full of coldness. This situation was not irreversible, but there was not much he could do. The Wang family of Beihai had become the key to breaking the situation. As the behind-the-scenes boss of the southeast group of Zhongzhou State, the Wang family of Beihai, which had the vague power of a country in Zhongzhou State, had been glorious for more than 500 years. Its deep foundation was enough to make everyone's scalp numb. Wang Tianzong went to the southwest border with the human emperor in his hand. Firmament, the Enchantress, Black Pupil, and Wang Shengxiao entered East Island. The Wang family of Beihai had invested a lot, but this was far from all their strength. If the strength of the Wang family of Beihai could be invested in a large number, how could Zhongzhou State be so embarrassed? In recent days, more than one high-level official of Zhongzhou State asked Wang Tianzong to invest more combat power in Zhongzhou State, but the Wang family of Beihai was very firm. They clearly said that they would reserve their strength to guard Beihai province in a sensitive situation, and they did invest a lot. Even if everyone knew that the Wang family of Beihai was saving their strength, they had nothing to say. Every man for himself, and heaven and earth would destroy him. The general trend was turbulent, and the situation was changing. Who could be selfless? Even Gu Xingyun himself, as the war god of Zhongzhou State, thought that he could not do it wholeheartedly for Zhongzhou State. How could he ask Beihai province, which had a very delicate relationship with Zhongzhou State? Perhaps the Li family was the only one who could do this, right? Unfortunately, Kunlun City and the Li family were destined not to coexist in Zhongzhou State. A glaring blue lightning flashed on the big screen that was rotating rapidly. The lightning rushed up to the sky and exploded the surging river. Gu Xingyun's pupils shrank suddenly, and he subconsciously shouted in a low voice, "Window 27, replay." There was no need to replay it at all. A deep and crazy voice directly resounded through the night sky of the Sky Academy through the heavy rain. "Gu Xingyun, come out and fight!" The loud voice shook the night sky, and the scene played back by Window 27 was the gate of the Sky Academy. A figure stood in the air above the river, and there was glaring lightning all over his body. He was not asking for a fight. It was an obvious signal. At the same time, on the continuously rolling screen, countless windows were in chaos almost at the same time. Many streets in Huating were attacked by unknown masters at the same time. Lightning and fire bloomed at every intersection. With violent explosions, cars and pedestrians were all crowded together, and the traffic of the whole city suddenly became chaotic. East Island elites hiding in downtown Huating began to break out in the rainy night. Zhuang Huayang quietly looked at the screen in front of him and said blandly, "The rain is heavy. In one night, I don't know how many small fish and shrimps can swim back to Chongdao with this rain. Hee, when they get back to Chongdao, they will really become big fish." At this moment, maybe only Zhongzhou State's god of army Yi Dongshang could laugh. He chuckled and shook his head, saying slowly, "Headmaster, Huating is not far from Chongdao, only separated by a sea area. It should be raining in Chongdao now. The rain in Huating can't drown them, but not necessarily in Chongdao." Zhuang Huayang was stunned for a moment. Gu Xingyun had already turned around. He stared at Yi Dongxing's bland face for a long time, and then said coldly, "You have a good plan." Yi Dongxing smiled blandly and didn't say much. But Gu Xingyun could already be sure that in such an ever-changing situation, the Wang family of Beihai suppressed its main force and didn't support Huating or the border. They weren't guarding Beihai province at all. This was a big gamble. The main force of the Wang family of Beihai might have already secretly entered Changdao. In a dangerous situation, he went deep into the enemy's rear with such courage. He could be called an ambitious man of his generation. If the Wang family of Beihai won the final battle in Changdao, even if Huading suffered heavy losses, even if the border failed, it was still a victory for Zhongzhou state. A Pyrrhic victory was also a victory. But Gu Xingyun had to bear the consequences of Huading's failure alone. What a good plan! The killing intent flashed in Gu Xingyun's eyes. In this battle, the 5 invincible realm experts weren't in their peak state. And he was seriously injured on the spot after the battle with the governor of Samsara. Although he consumed a bottle of precious potion that could be regarded as the foundation in Kunlun City, and recovered more than half of his strength, he was still not in his peak state. This night, under this night rain, he was destined to be extremely difficult. Gu Xingyun, come out and fight. In front of the Sky Academy, the seemingly reckless challenge rang out again, and the sound was like thunder. Boom! Before Gu Xingyun moved, a 6-story residential building in the residential area of the Sky Academy had been instantly shattered by a huge force. The 5 invincible realm experts trapped in the Sky Academy slowly moved forward in the ruins. Chapter 228. A bloody battle. For every soldier of the Thunderbolt Battalion, when their marshal, Dongqing Wudi, personally beat the war drum of the family and country, there was no way out of this war. Advance. Or die. The sound of killing at the border of Nanyun shook the sky. From dawn to dusk, blood was spilled over every inch of land on the border. Decisive roars and gunshots roared wantonly, bullets flew, and light beams shuttled back and forth. Large crowds crowded together, trying to kill the enemy by any means necessary. The thick ice wall was broken in the moment it was condensed. Fire and lightning intertwined, rising and burning but quickly extinguished. Corpses fell to the ground in disorder. The pungent smell of blood was everywhere inside and outside the forest. The blood evaporated and dried up in the fire. The bloody battle lasted for more than 10 hours. When the sun was about to set, the whole sky became a strange blood-red color. Under the blood-red sky, large patches of light and shadow were still intertwining and flashing. The sound of the war drum of the family and country never stopped, but became louder and louder. More and more people fell in pools of blood and were trampled into meat paste before they could even struggle. The people on both sides collided with each other in the rain of bullets with red eyes. The war seemed to never stop. From a distance, in the flashing light and shadow, the vast battlefield was like a Shura purgatory with a gorgeous coat. Under the gorgeous light and shadow, in addition to the blood and corpses, there was only madness and resentment. Night gradually fell on the border. The hoarse roars of thousands of people continued. The morale of the Border Control Corps soared, and they kept charging forward with reckless momentum. It was a madness that was enough to make anyone's scalp numb. They were so aggressive and radical that they ignored life and death. Boom! 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 A strong roar sounded in the depths of the forest in the distance. More than a dozen brilliant streams of light cut through the dark night in an instant. The cannonballs dragged a fiery red tail flame over the crowd of the Border Control Corps and landed in the rear of the enemy. In the angry roar, ice walls appeared one after another in the blink of an eye behind the enemy. The airflow in front of the ice walls was compressed to the extreme. At the same time, at least 10 thunder-shocking realm experts took action at the same time to stop the shells falling from the sky. The cannonballs that were fired at the same time struck the ice wall with a ferocious light of death. The earth-shattering sound covered the entire battlefield, and the tall and thick ice wall was completely torn apart. Huge chunks of ice flew everywhere, and the densely packed crowd instantly exploded into waves of blood. Broken limbs flew into the sky along with the flames, and suddenly, a large, dazzling blank space appeared behind the enemy. There were some uncontrolled disturbances at the forefront of the enemy. How could the soldiers of the Border Control Corps let go of this hard-won opportunity? They roared and charged forward, and the 1,000-meter-long battlefront was forced back several hundred meters. Boom! Boom! In the rear of the Border Control Corps, crazy artillery fire began to pour unscrupulously. Although the enemy occasionally fought back, their firepower was much worse than that of the Border Control Corps. The battle line, which was like a meat grinder, was forced to keep retreating. In the war that lasted more than 10 hours, the front line kept retreating and was about to withdraw from the territory of Zhongzhou State. Less than 300 meters behind them was the territory of Annan State. Cannonballs roared down from the sky one after another, and patches of the enemy were swallowed up by the strong explosions. There were more and more blank spaces in the rear of the enemy. In the headquarters at the rear of the enemy, a short commander's face became more and more unsightly. When the armed helicopters of the Border Control Corps slowly took off, the commander, who had been brewing his anger for a long time, could no longer hold it in and completely exploded. His short body jumped up from the ground and he shouted in English without any grace. "Bastards, all of you are bastards. When are you going to take action? Are you going to wait for all my people to die? My people have been fighting for more than 10 hours, and all the weapons and ammunition are running out. If you still don't take action, I will ask my people to withdraw." The commander's skin was dark and he was short, but his roar was full of energy, making everyone's ears buzz. He was not in a room, but on the top of a mountain behind the enemy. Within a radius of several kilometers, this could be said to be the highest place. Standing on the top of the mountain and looking down, with the help of binoculars, they could roughly see the situation of the battlefield even through the dense forest. "Don't get excited, Mr. Wan. You must know that this is a great war. Our losses may be heavy, but the results are equally brilliant. Because in this war, we can not only destroy the Blood Battalion, but also half of the Thunderbolt Battalion. You know what this means." In front of the commander, a middle-aged white man in his 50s smiled and said softly, "This is not your loss. This is my loss. All of it is mine." The short commander said coldly, "You have lost a lot, but you have also destroyed enough enemies." A white woman glanced at the commander and said coldly, "There were not many people on the top of the mountain. To be exact, there were only 6 people. The Polar Ground Alliance, the Heroes Club, Knights Templars, the Zhang family of South America, and Fantasy World. Each of the 5 superpowers had 1 person, but at this time they were united. The 6th person was the short commander. 5 against 1. The commander did not have the advantage in terms of number or strength. But in the thick night, he was not afraid at all. He just sneered and said, "So what? Even if we destroy the entire Border Control Corps, what can we get?" "Sorry." A soft voice sounded. Among the 5 superpowers, the man representing the Zhang family of South America laughed softly and said, "Mr. Wan, you can't get anything, because you and your troops are rebels." The commander's momentum suddenly stagnated, and then his whole body suddenly burst out with a fierce killing intent. In front of him, the representatives of the 5 superpowers almost took a step at the same time, intentionally or unintentionally, and stood together, looking at the commander in front of them coldly. Even if the rebels can't get anything, they shouldn't come to die. The commander looked at the 5 experts in front of him and said in a cold tone, "My troops have suffered heavy casualties and run out of ammunition. Now, I think it's time for you to take action. You have the right to refuse, but I also have the right to withdraw from this war. Everyone, I give you 5 minutes. You know what to do." "I don't think it's time yet." The white man who spoke first shook his head and said, "This is not in line with our plan, Mr. Wan. You must cooperate with us, or I will report your behavior to your president." "As you wish." The commander interrupted him with a sneer and said indifferently, "We are rebels. Do we need to care about other things?" He took out the walkie-talkie in his hand and looked provocatively at the 5 experts in front of him. He said mockingly, "You only have 3 minutes to think about it. I'll give you 2 choices. First, let your people press forward and fight with my troops. Second, kill me now, if you think you can take over my command. We're all friends. There's no need to go this far, is there?" The middle-aged man from the Zhang family of South America said with a smile. He picked up the binoculars and looked seriously at the battlefield below. After a long time he said softly, "Everyone, it's almost time. Mr. Wan is right. It's time for us to take action. Why don't we send our little butterflies to play with them first?" The other 4 people were slightly stunned. They were silent. Boom! A huge sound wave rang out from the back of the battlefield. Behind the Border Control Corps, there was a sudden burst of fire. Countless cannonballs rose in the air with trailing flames, like meteors, rushing into the enemy's rear one after another. The sky was illuminated by the fire. In the fierce explosion, the entire border was shaking wildly. It was like the end of the world. Chapter 229. As the absolute soul of the Border Control Corps, Dongqing Wudi had been at the forefront of the Thunderbolt Battalion from beginning to end, facing the densest and most ferocious fangs of the enemy. The bloody battle went from morning to noon and into the night. Dongqing Wudi had long forgotten how many people he had killed. He took bottles of military stimulants that could maintain his physical strength. The absolute power turned into sword light all over the sky. The sword rain was torrential, and the wind and thunder were roaring. He had been standing at the forefront of the battle line, facing the splashing rain of blood and never retreating. Everyone in the Thunderbolt Battalion was following his footsteps. The elite army of more than 10,000 people seemed to be completely integrated with him. As long as he was still standing at the forefront, the people in the rear would not retreat even if they died. Advance. Advance like crazy. In more than 10 hours, Dongqing Wudi took the lead and directly pushed forward the battle line by nearly 6 kilometers, and the distance was still expanding. The number of the enemy was actually far more than the 10,000 people of the Thunderbolt Battalion. The enemy's number was even close to 40,000 people. The disadvantage of the Border Control Corps was the number, while the disadvantage of the enemy was firepower, combat capability, and morale. The firepower was barely bearable, but the combat capability and morale could not be made up. As the most elite large army of Zhongzhou State, the combat capability of the Border Control Corps was second to none in the world. The Thunderbolt Battalion was the trump card of the Border Control Corps. In this battle, they were backed by the Blood Battalion, and the rear was supported by a lot of firepower from the Blood Battalion. At the forefront, their marshal was fighting the enemy bravely. In the battlefield of artillery fire, the Thunderbolt Battalion might be tired, but as long as Dongqing Wudi was still at the front, their morale would not weaken. The four gods of Zhongzhou State. In terms of combat capability, Dongqing Wudi was far inferior to Gu Xingyun, who was known as the god of war. In terms of strategy, he seemed to be inferior to Yi Dongsheng, the god of army. In terms of mystery, he could not compare with Situ Congyue, the hidden god. But Dongqing Wudi's killing intent and bravery could always burst out incisively and vividly at the most critical moment. He took the lead and would not retreat until he died. With him around, the entire Border Control Corps could erupt with an incredible fierceness and madness. He was the god of massacre of Zhongzhou State and also the soul of the Border Control Corps. There were nearly 3 million troops in Zhongzhou State, 5 theater of operations, an independent theater of operations, a Border Control Corps, and special forces of all sizes. In the past 100 years, no one had been as prestigious as Dongqing Wudi in his army. Just like before the Thunderbolt Legion marched in, Dongqing Wudi was saluting Zhongzhou State. But the Border Control Corps was saluting the marshal. Kill! In the blood-spattered night, Dongqing Wudi roared. His voice had long been hoarse, but it was indescribably majestic and heroic in the night. The artillery roared behind him and exploded into the enemy's rear. Dazzling shadows danced on the front line, and the intense gunshots became sparser and sparser. Only sword lights continued to flash on the battlefield. Dongqing Wudi had wounds all over his body. Blood gushed out of his body, and some parts of his body had become numb. He took out the last bottle of military stimulant and poured it into his mouth. He waved the long sword in his hand, and his eyes became more and more fierce and frenzied. In his sight, countless enemies rushed up again, roaring and attacking him. These people could be regarded as elites, but most of them had not entered the 4 realms of martial arts. Not to mention the ice-condensing realm and fire-flaming realm. Even the chi-controlling realm was pitifully small. Black clothes, no badges, no military flags, and no origin. Dongqing Wudi had seen several familiar figures in the crowd. They were the targets of Annan State that the Border Control Corps focused on. But now Scorpion in Annan State rebelled, and the Northern Army went south to quell the rebellion. Everything made sense. At least on the surface, these black-clothed enemies, who suddenly appeared, had no position and were only related to the 5 dark forces in the dark world. Dongqing Wudi didn't want to know who these people were. In his eyes, these people existed for only one purpose. That was to be cannon fodder to consume his own combat effectiveness. After more than 10 hours of fierce fighting, the elite experts of the 5 dark forces still hadn't appeared. When their physical strength was about to be exhausted and their ammunition was completely exhausted, the real battle had just begun. Dongqing Wudi wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, and his eyes became more and more upright. Boom, boom, boom. There was a sudden roar in the blood-red night sky. The huge sound came from an unknown place in the sky, but it was so clear on the ground, like thunder and an explosion. In the flying sword light, Dongqing Wudi suddenly looked up at the night sky. "General, that is," Shi Hanbing, who had been rushing behind Dongqing Wudi, asked breathlessly. His face was pale, and his body was shaking, as if he would fall down at any time. "Enemy!" Dongqing Wudi whispered. "The real enemy!" Boom! An unprecedented loud noise suddenly sounded in the sky beyond everyone's sight, and the blood-red night sky suddenly lit up in the highest place. The loud noise spread in the air, and the instantaneous light suddenly illuminated a large area of the blood-red night sky. The raging fire in the air seemed to burn up the sky. In the loud noise, messy sounds rang out one after another. The first fire had not been extinguished, but groups of fire had begun to bloom in the air. The sky within a radius of more than 10 kilometers was almost completely covered by the fire. The night sky was covered by the fire. Little by little, the fire became more and more erratic in the air, rising or falling, and finally fell to the ground in a struggle. It was a large number of fireballs, scattered and scattered, smashing to the battlefield below, like meteors. The battle on the whole battlefield seemed to be affected by the sudden change and gradually eased. The fireballs in the sky kept approaching the ground, and huge pieces of burning metal rubbed against the air and fell down. For a moment, there was no distinction between the enemy and the enemy. The fireballs fell everywhere, and the whole forest began to burn in the flames. Wreckage! That's the butterfly team. The butterfly team of the Heroes Club. Shi Hanbing suddenly reacted. He took a deep breath, and his expression was complicated. Damn it, these bastards are really willing to pay a heavy price. Wang Wantian cursed out loud. His entire face had changed. What kept falling from the sky was not weapons at all, but the wreckage of a large number of fighter planes. The battle in the sky was only for a moment, but at least 7 or 8 fighter planes fell. Some of them belonged to Zhongzhou State, but the others were the famous butterfly fighter. Butterfly fighter. One of the air forces of the Heroes Club. The specific number was unknown to the outside world, but there would be no more than 3 formations at most. The battle in the air was still going on. Judging from the scale, this time the Heroes Club had put in at least 1 formation of butterfly fighter, which was totally a heavy price. As soon as the real enemy appeared, they sent out butterfly fighter. What else would come later? The huge fireballs in the air were still falling. A section of a black wing burning with flames fell to the ground, and the raging fire instantly engulfed the forest for tens of meters. The corner of Dongqing Wudi's mouth twitched, and he said coldly, "Eagle fighter." The eagle fighter of the Jiang family of South America was not much less famous than the butterfly fighter in the Dark World. This kind of super force in the Dark World had always pursued the principle of quality over quantity. Whether it was eagle fighter or butterfly fighter, their advanced level could be said to be the best, which was also one of their strongest trump cards. If the butterfly fighter sent out a formation, the number of eagle fighter could not be much less. Since the 2 teams had put in a lot of money, the other 3 teams could not stand by and do nothing. The clear sound was so short and single, but with the momentum of tearing the 9th heaven, it clearly resounded in everyone's ears. The sound of the explosion disappeared, the roar disappeared, and the screams disappeared. Only that clear cry reverberated in the night, lingering in the ears. In the quiet mountain forest, a white light curtain rushed directly to the sky with the clear sound. It was silent like flowing light. It was full of majesty like a god. The thick night. The blood-red sky. In an instant, it was as bright as day. The blazing white light enveloped the whole world. For a moment, there was only a vast and dazzling white left in everyone's sight. The white light was spreading and disappearing. It was like a moment, but also like an eternity. When the white light dissipated, dozens of fighter planes had disappeared in the air without a sound, not even leaving the slightest wreckage. Under the sky, there was only one figure standing at the highest point of the void. A big black spear was held tightly in his hand, pointing to the sky. One man and one spear, in an instant, became the center of the whole world. Everyone was silent, staring blankly at the sky above. That was the most legendary invincible realm expert in the Dark World. It was the world-shaking murderous weapon that left too many legends in the Border Control Corps. After a short silence, the entire Thunderbolt battalion burst into cheers that went straight to the sky in an instant. The cheers were so fanatical and violent that the huge sound waves kept shaking the entire border. All the cheers turned into two words, echoing endlessly in the night sky, like a song that had been sung throughout the ages. Human Emperor. Chapter 230. The attack of the human emperor could be said to have changed the color of heaven and earth, turning the night into the day. The surging blazing white light hit the night sky tens of thousands of meters away. Anything tangible was turned into dust under the cover of the white light. More than half of the air forces of the 5 forces that had gathered together disappeared. This kind of power could completely destroy the world. This was the real world-destroying blow. As the #1 person in the Dark World, even if Wang Tianzong could not exert the power of the ultimate form of the human emperor, the destructive power of his attack was also the peak of the combination of a person and a murderous weapon in the Dark World. The #1 expert in the Dark World and the #1 murderous weapon in the Dark World. When both of them were at their peak, Wang Tianzong had the spirit to regard all the invincible realm experts in the world as nothing with a spear in his hand. The white light that covered the night had already disappeared. Amidst the earth-shattering cheers, only that clear cry seemed to still be echoing. All the surviving soldiers of the Border Control Corps roared like crazy. They were absolutely loyal to Dongqing Wudi, but they also admired the legend of Zhongzhou State. For hundreds of years in Zhongzhou State, every clear sound of the human emperor meant a great victory for Zhongzhou State in some major event. Every time the Wang family of Beihai and the human emperor joined the battlefield, it also meant that Zhongzhou State would go all out in this event and fight for every inch of land. Nothing could make Zhongzhou State compromise. The aftermath of the clear sound of the human emperor had not dissipated. The cheers of the word human emperor had already been heard. The blazing white light dispelled the blood red in the air. It was another clear night over the Nanyun border. The moon was bright and the stars were sparse. Wang Tianzong stood in the void, bathed in the moonlight falling from the sky. In the loud cheers he slowly said, "Who is here? Come out and fight." The voice was calm and indifferent. The low voice instantly suppressed the cheers on the ground and spread in the whole field. It was majestic, calm and confident. The dark human emperor had turned into the form of an arm guard, covering Wang Tianzong's right arm. Wang Tianzong's expression was calm, and he slowly raised the long sword in his hand. The moment the sword energy rose into the sky, behind a large number of enemies, in the void at almost the same height as Wang Tianzong, a touch of darkness like a raging flame suddenly surged up. The dense night couldn't suppress the darkness. Instead, it was dyed even darker by the black flame. The void was twisting and shaking. The black flame spread like ink, dyeing the void and the dark night. A dangerous aura that was filled with ruthlessness and death swept through the world, vast and mighty. It became more and more obvious in the night sky. "It's almost time." An indistinct voice suddenly rang out in the night sky. It was a very low and deep English accent. Every single word was filled with an almost violent fighting spirit. "Far from it." Wang Tianzong stared intently at the black flame that was constantly spreading in the void thousands of meters away, and his tone was cold. "The human emperor has moved. The cannon fodder is almost used up. It's time for our counterattack." The voice continued. It was icy cold and silent, and it seemed to have obliterated all emotions that a human should have. Not to mention the army of Zhongzhou State. Even in the enemy camp, anyone who could understand English looked angry. They took off their glory and put on the black clothes they were wearing now. They fought and bathed in blood, but in the end, they got the evaluation of cannon fodder. It was really sad. The black flame was silent, but it was spreading more and more violently. He was telling the truth. On this battlefield, even a half-step invincible realm expert like Dongqing Wudi was a nonentity in his eyes, not to mention ordinary soldiers. Why should he care about the thoughts of nonentities? Wang Tianzong slowly lowered his head. He didn't seem to care about the increasingly fierce black flame in the void at all. He just looked down at the black human emperor that had turned into an arm guard. The black human emperor was now lusterless. But as the black flame in front of it jumped, the black metal surface of the human emperor seemed to have a reaction and kept rippling. Wang Tianzong stroked the arm guard, expressionless. There were few records about murderous weapons in the Dark World. The 13 murderous weapons usually appeared at the most critical moment, so some secrets that were not secrets were not widely spread. Especially about the origin of the murderous weapons. Only a few people in the Dark World knew that the 13 murderous weapons came from the same source. They came from the same piece of metal, but they were different in size and color. This kind of rare treasure originally came from a superpower overseas. After its decline hundreds of years ago, it was robbed and finally divided into 13 parts. 19 years ago, with the destruction of the Lee family's murderous weapon Infinite Sky, the 12 murderous weapons left today were all that was left of that piece of metal. For countless years, all the superpowers and even countries had been searching for this mysterious metal intentionally or unintentionally. But for hundreds of years, there was only one such piece of metal. Since it was divided, no new murderous weapons had appeared. The murderous weapons were made into guns, but they didn't need bullets. The energy they emitted was entirely the energy they absorbed. In short, murderous weapons needed to store energy, which was their biggest weakness. The last time the human emperor made a clear sound was more than a decade ago. The accumulated energy of more than a decade was vented with the firing of the human emperor tonight. As for when it could be used again, whether it would be a month or two, a year or two, it was the top secret of the Wang family of Beihai. But at least in this battle, the human emperor that had already fired couldn't play a role for the time being. However, the human emperor destroyed dozens of fighter jets in one fell swoop with the energy accumulated by the human emperor over the years. Such a result was not a disgrace to the reputation of the human emperor. And the most important thing was that those famous flying teams were obviously the bait left by the 5 superpowers for the human emperor. If the human emperor didn't move, the invincible realm experts hidden in the dark wouldn't come out to court death. No one knew how long this war would last. So Wang Tianzong simply used the human emperor to swallow the bait. Time was limited, so he had to finish the battle quickly. The light in Wang Tianzong's eyes gradually became sharp. He ranked first on the divine list and should be invincible in the world. Even without the human emperor, he still had a sword. With a sword in hand, he was fearless. Even without the human emperor, you are no match for me. Arsis, do you really think a murderous weapon that hasn't been storing energy for a long time can do anything to me? Wang Tianzong slowly raised his head. Staring at the black flame in the void, his tone became colder and colder. From the first time he saw the black flame, he had already determined who the invincible realm expert who came to the border this time was. He didn't belong to any invincible realm expert from the 5 superpowers, but he was inextricably linked to Knights Templars. To be precise, he was one of the masters of Knights Templars. The second on the world divine list. Saint War Angel of the Vatican, Saint Arsis. I want to have a try. The deep voice, like a murmur, echoed in the sky. In the void, the black flame suddenly rose to the limit. The murderous weapon had been fully activated. The black flame was like a tide, and it suddenly set off a black wave as high as the sky. Wang Tianzong said no more and raised the long sword horizontally. This was a simple and old long sword that didn't look special. But as the blade was unsheathed inch by inch, the long sword suddenly burst out with unparalleled brilliance. This was a famous sword that had been around for less than 200 years. It was a famous sword that was made up of several broken swords from the Wang family of Beihai. The sword energy was shocking. The sword is called Listen to the Sea. There was a surge under Listen to the Sea. Boom! The black flame that dyed the whole sky suddenly vibrated. The moment the black flame wave twisted, in the void ahead, a tall and majestic figure suddenly appeared in the void. A black spear that was more than 1 meter long and shaped like a shotgun was held in his hand. He pointed the muzzle at Wang Tianzong and pulled the trigger without hesitation. There was a sudden explosion in the night sky. It sounded like a scream, but also like a sigh. This was the murderous weapon that had made the Dark Knights suffer heavy losses in Northern Europe 5 years ago. It was also the murderous weapon that helped Knights Templars successfully withstand the great pressure of the Dark Knights. It was also the murderous weapon that belonged to Saint War Angel of the Vatican, Arsis. Chant of Death. The black flame surged, and the starlight and moonlight were completely covered by the black flame. The black light almost enveloped all the space around Wang Tianzong in an instant. The moment Listen to the Sea was about to be unsheathed. On the east and west sides of the battlefield, there was a long roar that shook the night sky almost at the same time. One east and one west. It was an old roar filled with endless battle intent. The other voice was relatively young, full of tiredness and helplessness. The long roar sounded one after another, but the 2 strong lights arrived at the moment when Listen to the Sea was unsheathed. The sword energy was boiling in the air, and the whole world was trembling. The infinite sword light surged in the east and the west, but the sword energy was incredibly from the same source. It was a different momentum, but it was almost the same sword chi and sword intent. The two sword energy converged in the air in an instant. The extremely powerful sword intent merged incredibly in an instant, and the power increased exponentially. In the black flame all over the sky, the two sword energy converged together like a rainbow, and instantly dispersed the flame all over the sky. Aris's pupils suddenly contracted. In an instant, all the scenes in front of him disappeared completely, and there were only two sword lights left in the whole world. A blood-colored long sword flew in the air. A blood-colored flag whistled across the sky. Completely different weapons. It was the same sword intent. The same unique skill. 20-second blade, break of the sky. A flag and a sword flew from different directions and crossed a distance of thousands of meters. Originally, it was not a joint sword, but when they merged together, it broke out an incredible power. The bright edge smashed the black flame all over the sky in the blink of an eye. The edge ran through the world, and the void was torn and broken inch by inch in the powerful sword light. The sword light spread. The black flame was broken. The peerless edge swallowed Arsis in an instant. It swallowed the chant of death in his hand. Li Hongha. There was a roar of extreme pain in the darkness. Wrapped by the bright sword light, Aris's body instantly retreated. A blood-colored star flag directly stabbed into Aris's abdomen. The flag fluttered and flew in the wind. Suddenly, two figures appeared in front of Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong calmly withdrew the long sword and did not look at Arsis. He just silently looked at the old man in front of him, with a complicated look in his eyes. Lin Fengting, who rushed to Zhongzhou State from Switzerland, also had a change in his eyes. The old man standing in the front no longer had the star flag in his hand. He stood in the void with his back to Lin Fengting and Wang Tianzong, and his whole body was surging with a kind of fighting intent and coldness that could almost suppress heaven and earth. That kind of crazy and fierce momentum suppressed Wang Tianzong and Lin Fengting in the peak state. He was indomitable and unrestrained. And he could no longer restrain himself. He really could not restrain himself. Lin Fengting's eyes suddenly turned red. His body trembled, and he took a deep breath. Together with Wang Tianzong, he bowed deeply to the old man in front of him and said respectfully, "Senior Li." Li Honghe, who had been fighting on 13 battlefields in a day, was covered with blood. Instead of weakening, his aura was getting stronger and stronger. He slowly turned around, looked at Wang Tianzong and Lin Fengting who were bowing in front of him, and then looked at Arsis who had retreated to the distance. After a while, he nodded and whispered, "He is wearing the holy garment of the Vatican, so he is not badly hurt. If we want to keep him in the chant of death, it is bound to be a long fight. It won't waste much time." Wang Tianzong straightened up and said. Lin Fengting did not speak. Arsis was the second on the divine list. Although he was seriously injured now, it was not fatal. It was not difficult to defeat him, but it was not easy to kill him even if the three of them joined forces. If Arsis wanted to run away, it would definitely be a problem. It won't waste much time? Do you still have time? Huating has been in chaos for a long time. Your people in East Island will also be wiped out. In the distance, Arsis said with a cold smile, his face pale. The holy garment of the Vatican on him, which was similar to a robe, was completely broken, but his voice was still full of energy. Li Honghe narrowed his eyes slightly and suddenly said, "You go back to Huating. I'll deal with him." "Senior Li," Wang Tianzong and Lin Fengting said at the same time. "Don't say more. Hurry up. My current state. Hey. His voice was very low, and there was unspeakable misery in his self-mockery. "It's too late," Arsis whispered, and his figure disappeared into the void again. His voice came from all directions. "So what if you go back to Huating now? Don't you want the 100,000 troops of the Blood Battalion? I lost, but there are still more than 200 experts from the 5 superpowers here. What do you have on the border of Zhongzhou State? As long as you dare to leave, the Blood Battalion will definitely disappear. You're bound to lose, haha, ha ha ha. Swish." Li Honghe, whose aura was extremely strong, did not hesitate at all. He directly rushed toward the place where Arsis disappeared. He did not look back, but just calmly and indifferently ordered, "You go back to Huating." "I'm here." After many years they met again. In the face of Wang Tianzong, he did not talk about grievances. In the face of Lin Fengting, he did not talk about the inheritance. At this moment, Li Honghe seemed to go back to decades ago. He was the war god of Zhongzhou State. On the battlefield, there was only Zhongzhou State in his heart. You. Haha, not enough. Who else? Who else? In Arasis's presumptuous laughter, the enemy on the ground and the battle team in the air gathered together. The experts of the Thunder-Shocking Realm and Fire-Flaming Realm from the 5 superpowers all appeared in the enemy's camp, and their killing intent kept spreading. Me too. Zhou Qiang from Zhuanyuantai of Kunlun is willing to fight for the Li family. Qing Yi from Zhuanyuantai of Kunlun is willing to fight for the Li family. Lu He from Zhuanyuantai of Kunlun is willing to fight for the Li family. One voice after another suddenly sounded in the depths of the forest, shaking in the night sky like thunder. Dozens of figures appeared in the forest, men and women, old and young. Everyone was dressed in ragged coarse clothes. No one wore a military uniform, no one carried a military rank, and no one mentioned Zhongzhou State. They mentioned Zhuanyuantai of Kunlun and the Li family. To your highness. To the Li family. The hoarse roar sounded in the night sky in unison. To Li Honghe. These elites of the Li family, who had lingered on the border for many years, were finally willing to fight for the Li family. Only for the Li family. After all, the knot in their hearts had not been untied, and probably could not be untied. In the late night of the 5th day, the remaining Li family, with their glory that had long fallen into the dust, directly confronted the 5 dark forces in their heyday. How lonely the dark world without the Li family would be. Chapter 231. There was no sword in Li Honghe's hand, but as he moved, there were obscure but sharp sword intent everywhere in the deep night. The ubiquitous sword intent followed him like a shadow. As he charged, it turned into a dazzling sword light. A large area of the void was torn apart by the sword light, but Arsis and Li Honghe had completely disappeared. The roars echoed in the border one after another, calm and tragic. The elites of the Li family, who had been stationed on the border for nearly 2 decades, kept rushing out of the jungle. Fighting. Only fighting. Arsis showed up. The chant of death fired. The 5 combat teams in the air appeared again. The bright light and shadow on the ground shone and twisted to the limit, and finally expanded to the night sky. The sound of vibration was endless. The whole battlefield had completely disappeared from sight, leaving only the light. Brilliant, tragic light. Lin Fengting wanted to make a move several times, but he was held tightly by Wang Tianzong. The Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State, who could be said to be the best in both boldness and force, was in a trance, with unconcealable confusion and sadness in his eyes. The flickering light and shadow of the battlefield below were clearly reflected in his pupils. He held Lin Fengting's body and said calmly, "This is the war of the Li family. Is this the reason why you stand by?" Lin Fengting shook off Wang Tianzong's hand fiercely and said with a sneer. The patriarch of the Lin clan, who usually looked so free and unrestrained that he had nothing to do with the world, had indifferent eyes. When his eyes flashed, they were full of soul-stirring sharpness and sword intent. "I have more important things to do." Wang Tianzong's trance finally became calm. He took a deep look at the direction where Li Honghe left and continued, "Fengting, since you are here, how about going to Huating with me?" Lin Fengting raised his eyebrows and narrowed his eyes slightly. Before he could speak, Wang Tianzong said again, "Don't worry, Senior Li is fine, at least for now. He destroyed his own foundation. In such a state, not to mention our sis, even I am no match for him. I have seen this kind of thing with my own eyes, so I have the right to speak. So, we have won the border battle." Lin Fengting's expression, which was about to explode, moved and gradually became gloomy. He looked in the direction where Li Honghe had disappeared in silence and did not speak for a long time. Li Honghe's current state was so powerful that it was almost weird. Lin Fengting had never seen such a state before, but he had heard of it. Judging from Li Honghe's current age, even if he could still exert the strength of the invincible realm, his combat capability should have declined to the lowest point. But his performance today showed that his combat capability not only did not decline, but also vaguely exceeded the peak state. There was only one explanation for this phenomenon. In martial arts, this was called self-destruction of the foundation, Or perhaps, the final radiance of the setting sun. What did it mean to forcefully stimulate every bone and muscle in one's body when one's body was at its weakest, allowing one to recover and even surpass one's peak state? The so-called peak combat capability could only be possessed in the golden years when a person's body was at its strongest. Li Honghe's body had been old for a long time, but at this time, he was bearing the power that could only be born when his body was in its best state. Li Honghe's every move was incredibly powerful, but his ending had long been doomed. There were only two outcomes. If the human body was compared to a jar, then the power was the flame in the jar. The jar itself would become stronger and stronger, and the internal flame would become more and more blazing, always maintaining a balance. As time went by, the jar would gradually decay, and the internal flame would become weaker and weaker. This was an irresistible law of nature. But what Li Honghe was doing now was equivalent to using a worn-out jar to hold the hottest flame. The first outcome was naturally that the jar was completely destroyed by the flame. The second outcome was not much better. In the fierce battle, Li Honghe would temporarily vent part of the flame in the jar, but his body, which had long been out of balance, could no longer bear the excessive power. In the worn-out jar, the flame would burn more and more fiercely over time. The jar might barely be able to contain the flame, but the imbalance was already destined. The flame would constantly erode the decayed jar, and eventually, the jar would be completely burned to ashes. This process was destined to be painful and tortuous, but the outcome could not be reversed. In this battle, if Li Honghe did not die, his body would become weaker and weaker, but his combat capability would become stronger and stronger, until the balance between his strength and his body was completely broken. At that time, he would turn into ashes without anyone's help. This period of time might last for a few months, or even a few years. Wang Tianzong had seen this extremely terrible state with his own eyes. More than 20 years ago, before Wang Tianzong entered the Invincible Realm, the Heroes Club, an American superpower, joined forces with Fantasy World and the Polar Ground Alliance to invade Zhongzhou State. The old patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai, who was also Wang Tianzong's father, once joined forces with Li Honghe to attack. In that battle, the old patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai, faced with the siege of 3 Invincible Realm experts, had no choice but to make such a cruel and decisive choice. After the battle, 2 Invincible Realm experts died, and 1 escaped with serious injuries. Wang Tianzong's father struggled to return to the Wang family of Beihai. His body was getting weaker and weaker under the surging power, but the longer it dragged on, the stronger his combat capability became. During that time, the old patriarch was seriously injured, and Wang Tianzong did not enter the Invincible Realm. It could be said that it was the weakest period of the Wang family of Beihai, but no one in the Dark World dared to provoke them. The old patriarch held on for a few years, until Wang Tianzong successfully entered the Invincible Realm, and then he gave up fighting and died peacefully. "Senior Li needs to fight now," Wang Tianzong said calmly. He seemed to think of something, and a trace of gloom flashed in his eyes for a moment, and then it became deep again. An armed helicopter roared and hovered in the air, getting closer and closer. "Feng Ting, how about going to Huiting together? The situation is precarious. After this, I think we should have a good talk." Wang Tianzong looked at the helicopter in the distance and suddenly said, "We can talk now. We still have time to go from here to Huiting." Lin Fengting took a deep breath, and his whole body suddenly rushed into the sky, entering the cabin with Wang Tianzong one after the other. The helicopter circled and rushed to Huiting at the fastest speed. Someone committed treason. Most of the rotor's roar was blocked by the cabin. Wang Tianzong silently looked at the night outside the window and suddenly said. Lin Fengting raised his eyebrows and looked at Wang Tianzong, but he did not speak. Wang Tianzong seemed to have a headache. He rubbed his forehead and sighed. "I found it not long ago. For this war, the Border Control Corps is actually well prepared. Although there is no power to fight against murderous weapons and invincible realm experts here, the firepower is still very sufficient. But a few hours ago, someone secretly changed the password of the arsenal of the Border Control Corps, and at the same time, sent dozens of completely different wrong instructions to the nearby Air Force base, which also led to the border battle just now. Our air power is extremely weak, and the air defense power of the Blood Battalion was changed because the password was changed. It can't be launched in a short time, so I had to use the Human Emperor. Otherwise, the attack of the Human Emperor should have directly fallen on our sis. The other party is really well prepared this time. Lin Fengting listened quietly. When Wang Tianzong finished, he nodded and said, "Do you have any suspects?" "No." Wang Tianzong shook his head with a wry smile. "It's under secret investigation. At present, few people know about it, including President Li Huaqing, Qi Beizong, the Minister of the Army Headquarters, Yi Dongsheng, me, and Dongqing Wudi. This is very important, but it's not the right time to make it public. Let's talk about it after Chongdao is over." Lin Fengting gave a cold "oh" and said calmly, "You know, I don't care about these things. The Lin clan is just a passerby to Zhongzhou State. We only care about what we should care about." Wang Tianzong listened with a smile, took a meaningful look at Lin Fengting, and said softly, "If you were really so free and easy, you wouldn't have shown up here today." "Don't get me wrong." Lin Fengting shook his head and said, "I'm here today just to try to be a lobbyist, and at the same time, I want to figure out something." Wang Tianzong took a deep look at Lin Fengting. After a long time, he nodded and said, "Go ahead." The Li family. Lin Fengting's eyes were solemn and sharp. He stared straight at Wang Tianzong in front of him and said in a deep voice, "What on earth happened to the Li family that year?" "Don't say treason." Before Wang Tianzong opened his mouth, he waved his hand and said, "Treason is the result. What's the cause?" Wang Tianzong was silent. Under Lin Fengting's increasingly sharp eyes, after a long time he said blandly, "Seeking change." "Seeking change?" Lin Fengting frowned. "The dark world is turbulent. Every superpower has its own pursuit, and it must make some adjustments because of its own pursuit or because of perceived problems. The Li family died on the road of seeking change. They chose the wrong time in the game, and finally exited in disgrace." Wang Tianzong said slowly, "The reason why the Wang family of Beihai didn't take action at that time was that it was indeed more in line with the interests of the Wang family of Beihai. Secondly, it was because it was the Li family's own business." He stared at Lin Fengting's eyes seriously and repeated in a serious tone, "It was the Li family's own business. What on earth do you know?" Lin Fengting looked more and more solemn. "I don't know. Even if I know, I'm not sure." Wang Tianzong shook his head, avoided Lin Fengting's eyes, and said blandly, "The Wang family of Beihai also needs to seek change. We will also take this road. The Li family took this road earlier. In fact, if the Wang family of Beihai took the lead, the status quo could be maintained if it succeeded. But if it failed, do you really think the Li family would help?" He paused and said coldly, "Why?" Lin Fengting closed his eyes, feeling more and more tired. What is right and wrong in this world? What is grievance? What is friendship? Wang Tianzong sighed softly and looked at the tired Lin Fengting. "Fengting, don't ask about this. It can't be explained clearly." "I don't need to ask about this." The corner of Lin Fengting's mouth twitched, and he said slowly, "But let's put Li Tianlan's matter aside." Wang Tianzong's expression froze, and he said calmly, "Put it aside? Do you know the origin of the master of Samsara Palace?" Lin Fengting asked softly, physically and mentally exhausted. "Do you know?" Wang Tianzong asked in reply. "She mastered the 24 moves of sword of the Li family. We all guessed that she was the backup left by Senior Li. I'll investigate it again, and I believe you're also investigating it. This person didn't appear at all in our time, as if she didn't exist at all. I think it's not that she didn't exist, but that we were investigating in the wrong direction. If she really has nothing to do with Senior Li and knows the 24 moves of sword, then where do you think she came from?" Lin Fengting asked. Wang Tianzong's body shook violently, and he suddenly looked up at Lin Fengting in front of him. He said word by word, "You mean the master of Samsara Palace is from your Lin clan?" "I'm not sure." Lin Fengting shook his head bitterly. Over the years, many people couldn't stand the boredom of the Lin clan. They took the money and went sightseeing. Several elders in the clan have been gone for 50 or 60 years and haven't come back. I don't even know if they are still alive. There are too many people like this in the Lin clan. The master of Samsara Palace is probably a junior of these people. She's my younger sister or elder sister. I can tell you the truth. I'm very uncomfortable with the destruction of the Li family. If Tianlan didn't show up, I would have decided to let Yu Xian revive Zhuan Yuantai. I have this idea, and the Lin clansmen wandering outside may have the same idea. the master of Samsara Palace found Tianlan, which is enough to prove the problem. I know your character. You won't let go of Tianlan. If something happens to Tianlan, the master of Samsara Palace takes action and asks for help from the Lin clan. What do you think the position of the Lin clan will be? You won't care about the Li family, but won't you consider the attitude of the Lin clan? Wang Tianzong was silent. The Lin clan didn't show its strength, but its absolute strength was enough to make anyone feel like facing a formidable enemy. Is this a threat? Wang Tianzong was silent for a while and asked lightly. It's a piece of advice. Lin Fengting said calmly. We have supported each other for hundreds of years. Do you really want to fight against each other? Wang Tianzong nodded slowly and said softly, if you told me these words a few months ago, or even a month ago, maybe I would have changed my mind. What about now? Lin Fengting's face changed. It's too late now. Wang Tianzong said coldly, it's too late. Lin Fengting sat up straight calmly and said calmly, what do you mean? When you went to Mount Dibbing last time, didn't you ask me where Hongwei went? Wang Tianzong said softly. It's that guy. Lin Fengting's expression softened a little. He said with a chuckle. Why? You said it was a secret at that time. Can you tell me now? Jiang Hongwei, the only official disciple of Wang Tianzong, was also the young man that Lin Fengting once tried to lure back to the Lin clan. The Jiang family of Beihai was one of the most important parts of the Wang family of Beihai, and Jiang Hongwei was the only successor of the Jiang family. At that time, the patriarch of the Jiang family hesitated between the Lin clan and the Wang family of Beihai for a long time, and finally let Jiang Hongwei be Wang Tianzong's disciple. However, for many years, there was no news of Jiang Hongwei in the Wang family of Beihai. Jiang Hongwei should be 33 years old this year. A 33-year-old with double thunder veins. He got the inheritance of Sword Emperor. How terrifying he was now. All these years, he has been in North America, in charge of a secret research institute. Wang Tianzong said calmly, you should have heard of that research institute. One of the drugs he is researching is called Surge. A few months ago, Samsara traded Surge through a special channel. It should have been taken by Li Tianlan. Is that the research institute of the Wang family of Beihai? Lin Fengting frowned, took a deep breath and said, and then? Wang Tianzong smiled and said, about half a month ago, Shang Xiao taught Li Tianlan a style of Against the Way of Heaven. As for Li Tianlan, according to my secret investigation, he is indeed extraordinary. He broke through the fire-flaming realm and went straight to the thunder-shocking realm at the age of 17. Before Wang Tianzong finished speaking, Lin Fengting's face had changed. Surge could improve a person's combat capability by one realm. Against the Way of Heaven was the same. It was impossible for the two to have nothing to do with each other. And Li Tianlan had entered the thunder-shocking realm before. It was all a conspiracy. A conspiracy to kill people in an invisible way. Lin Fengting stood up slowly with a cold expression. I can promise you. Wang Tianzong said blandly, if Li Tianlan doesn't die this time, I won't touch him in a few years, provided that he doesn't die. Now it's too late. The research institute in North America has been destroyed. Hongwei should have arrived in East Island now. Although the Wang family of Beihai has not had a second invincible realm expert, it already has the combat capability of a second invincible realm expert. Now it's too late. Lin Fengting suddenly turned around and looked out of the window. It was dark outside the window. It was the darkest time before dawn again. Time passed slowly. In the deepening night, the morning came gradually. Chapter 232. They were retreating. They were fleeing. The distance between retreating and advancing was almost constant. The distance of hundreds of meters had been maintained, neither too far nor too close, neither too far nor too close. In front of them was still a boundless forest. Under the dim light of the setting sun, the dense mottled shadows of the trees scattered on the ground, flickering. But behind them was already a stretch of yellow sand. Trees of different sizes and thicknesses had been completely decomposed into pieces that were hard to be seen by the naked eye. The grass had completely disappeared, the soil had lost its vitality, and the water had completely evaporated. The yellow sand on the ground was scattered around, and the gravel rolled in the wind, reflecting the light that was more dazzling than the sun. Wisps of flames gathered in the fine sand. The flame gradually turned from orange to transparent. When the flame was about to disappear completely, wisps of blue lightning began to breed in the flame. Fire and lightning intertwined and spread. As a result, more and more trees began to fall and shatter. The lush green land turned into yellow sand under the extremely high temperature. It was like a barren desert. Dozens of people ran wildly in the forest without looking back. They had reached the center of the No. 6 Theater of Operations. About 3 kilometers ahead, they could reach the headquarters of the No. 6 Theater of Operations. The No. 6 Theater of Operations was divided by the Special Warfare System of East Island. Shinichi Miyamoto, the only expert of the Invincible Realm in East Island, personally divided the battlefield with a radius of 100 miles into 8 theaters of operations. The No. 6 Theater of Operations referred to the forest with a radius of about 30 kilometers. In terms of location, it was already at the end of the battlefield. Wuji Palace, Jifeng Sword Training School. Liuhua Palace and the Divine Wind Force both had elites stationed in the No. 6 Theater of Operations. It was not a very important theater of operations, but since 2 days ago, it had been regarded as the beast-trapped theater of operations. They ran and chased. On the night of the 4th day, Li Tianlan entered the No. 6 Theater of Operations. But who could have thought that this trapped beast, which many people thought had nowhere to go, would be so crazy in 2 days and 2 nights? Qing Shan is approaching the headquarters. Fei Yu is approaching the headquarters. Request backup. The fleeing team kept moving forward, and the urgent call for help kept reaching the headquarters a few kilometers away. How's the situation? The rustling sound of the walkie-talkie sounded, and a depressed and cold voice came from the walkie-talkie. We've suffered heavy losses. Requesting backup. Qing Shan's voice passed over without any pause. He came from Wuji Palace, the most powerful martial arts force in East Island, and his strength was close to the stabilization phase of the Thundershocking realm. In the entire special warfare system of East Island, he could be said to be an important master who could not be underestimated. But at this moment, this tall swordsman from Limitless Palace was in an extremely sorry state. Blood flowed from all over his body. His face was completely covered in blood. His eyes, which were dyed red by blood, flickered continuously. His eyes were full of fear and despair. We'll be right there, the final battle. From the walkie-talkie, the suppressed voice sounded again, but it sounded extremely dry. Qing Shan laughed bitterly, but he didn't dare to turn around. He could only brace himself and roar. Target the command center. Full speed ahead. His voice was very loud, but it lacked any confidence. The headquarters was close at hand, but Qing Shan didn't feel safe at all. The commander-in-chief of the No. 6 Theater of Operations was codenamed Yuekong, the first protector of Wuji Palace, a real superior of the half-step invincible realm. Qing Shan himself was an expert from Wuji Palace, so he had a deep understanding of the strength of the first protector. He was completely sure that Yuekong's combat capability was above that of Bai Yi, the right advisor of Wuji Palace. But a superior of the half-step invincible realm was right in front of him, and Qing Shan was getting more and more frightened. In a panic, he hurriedly looked back. The flame with lightning was burning silently, and a large area of the forest was swallowed by the flame and turned into a desert. The setting sun, the yellow sand, the bloody clothes, the silver spear. The wind blew and the clouds moved. It was a vivid and weird picture. Qing Shan's scalp went numb, and he felt weak all over for a moment. He was breaking through. He was transforming. One picture after another flashed and disappeared in Li Tianlan's mind. Day and night. The memories that had been suppressed for many years kept emerging in his mind. His willpower broke through the shackles. Many people and many things kept spinning in his mind. Li Tianlan's expression was numb and muddle-headed, but he exuded an indescribable sharpness and insolence. As the young master of the Li family, as my grandson, Tianlan, do you regret it? Dongqing Huang too. Tianlan, I'm sorry. Maybe I was really wrong. If it shouldn't be, then forget it. You are the heavenly son, but you should not only be the heavenly son of the Li family. Your martial arts should not be limited to the sword. The ultimate form of the human emperor. He had a splitting headache. Countless memories came one after another. He didn't want to recall them, but all kinds of memories kept hitting his mind, painful, excited, and confused. His willpower, which was already close to the peak, was sublimated after breaking through the final shackles. The power of his sword intent skyrocketed under the pure and invincible willpower. Li Tianlan broke through again, broke through the ice-condensing realm, and was infinitely close to the fire-flaming realm. The surge potion stimulated his nerves all the time. After a big realm leap, Li Tianlan's combat capability had stabilized at the half-step thunder-shocking realm. But in his chaotic memories, there was always a scene that lingered in his mind. It was a picture, a sentence. You have to remember, the real invincible thing is not unique skills or realms. For the Li family, the invincible thing is the sword intent, and only the sword intent. Ah! His thoughts were tumbling, and the endless pain in his head spread all over his body. Li Tianlan roared fiercely, and the figure instantly sped up. The distance of hundreds of meters was shortened at a high speed. Qing Shan and Fei Yu were scared out of their wits. They sprinted with all their strength, even ignoring the lives of their subordinates. The fire behind them instantly filled the mountain forest. But the fierce sword intent tore the air faster than the fire. It was the sword intent condensed to the extreme, cold, pure, and could break everything. Boom! The sword intent whistled and scattered. More than a dozen elites were torn into powder on the spot by the fierce and powerful sword intent. The silver edge did not stop at all. It passed through the blood rain and stopped directly in front of Qing Shan and Fei Yu. Qing Shan and Fei Yu, who were sprinting at full speed, stopped abruptly. Looking at Li Tianlan in front of them, their pupils contracted. "We're almost there. I'll send you on your way," Li Tianlan said blandly. The severe pain in his head completely woke him up from his muddle-headed state. For 2 days and 2 nights, from being chased to being chased, the scenes replayed in his mind. While his memory became clear, Li Tianlan seemed to feel that some memories were leaving him. Those were the scenes he once recalled, and now they were gradually becoming blurred. Li Tianlan's expression was calm and indifferent. The old scenes were disappearing, and new ones were appearing. The ultimate form of the human emperor. Is that so? Li Tianlan whispered to himself, and his arms suddenly shook. Absolute power was completely poured into the silver spear in his hand. Under the gradually gloomy light, the silver spear, which was more than 2 meters long, seemed to suddenly light up. The spear body of the human emperor shook violently. The silver spear head buzzed, and the blades on both sides of the spear head suddenly stretched. After the breakthrough, the power that was infinitely close to the thunder-shocking realm completely shook the mechanism of the human emperor. 2 red spear blades suddenly stretched out. It was a pair of red, sparkling and translucent spear blades. Countless complex golden patterns were densely intertwined on the surface of the spear, looking gorgeous and mysterious. At this moment, the whole shape of the human emperor completely changed because of the 2 huge spear blades. From the silver spear, it became a halberd. Sky halberd. This was the ultimate form of the human emperor. In a trance, another picture emerged in his mind. Li Tianlan's eyes were calm, but his heart was slightly turbulent. In his memory, it was still in the camp on the border. But he saw a monk he shouldn't have seen. Great Master Wu Wei. It turned out that he had seen this metaphysics grandmaster before, a long time ago. In the picture, Great Master Wu Wei seemed to be saying something, but in a trance, Li Tianlan finally heard only 4 words. Great Master Wu Wei. The memory was still surging. He was recalling. Chapter 233. Halberd, an ancient powerful weapon, was shaped like a long spear. The 2 crescent-shaped spear blades stretched out on both sides of the spear tip, which could be used to stab and chop. It was a cold weapon with the highest requirements for the user. Throughout history, all the people who were good at using sky halberd were fierce generals who dominated an era. The leader of all weapons, the emperor of all weapons. The silver halberd glowed in the deep night. The spearhead of the human emperor was a bit broken, but the newly stretched spear blade was shining with dazzling brilliance. It was a kind of strange and indescribable scarlet, like solidified blood, crystal clear. Complicated golden lines wrapped around the red spear blade. The gold and red intertwined. Against the silver, the whole sky halberd seemed to be alive. Li Tianlan's eyes were unprecedentedly clear. He took a step forward and raised the sky halberd in his hand. In an instant, The mountain was shrouded in the thick night. The sky halberd and him became one, and suddenly emitted a kind of earth-shattering momentum. The memories that poured into his mind like a tide began to stop. They were breaking and dissipating. From the stabilization phase of the ice-condensing realm to the peak of the ice-condensing realm, and now he was in the half-step fire-flaming realm. His realm had crossed 2 small steps in 2 days, but his willpower had improved more than several times. If the most important thing in the early stage of martial arts was strength, the most important thing in the later stage was willpower. In the same realm, the absolutely focused willpower could exert incredible lethality. Willpower was concentration. In other words, concentration. If Li Tianlan's strength and willpower were quantified, his willpower was 5 and his strength was 10, then he could exert the combat capability of 5 at most. He might be focused enough, but obviously not to the extent that he could exert all his strength. Now his willpower had doubled, and his lethality had also doubled. Li Tianlan hadn't recovered to the thunder-shocking realm yet, but he vaguely felt that he was already standing at the peak of his life. The memory he got back was forgotten, but the true self that he had lost had completely returned. So he could turn the tables in 2 days and almost defeat the No. 6 Theater of Operations in East Island with his own strength. Until this moment, Li Tianlan felt a feeling that he could be unrivaled and look down on everyone. During the duration of the surge drug, there weren't many people in East Island who could scare him. Vaguely, Li Tianlan seemed to see a brand new path. The Great Way was extremely broad and primitive, but it went straight to the sky, constantly impacting his existing concepts. His instinct kept reminding him that this was the most suitable martial arts for him. But among the gradually fading images in his mind, there was always an image that kept reverberating in his mind like a curse. He was Great Master Wu Wei. It was his 4 words. It was a great victory. Was it really worth it to lose and gain in the midst of destruction? Li Tianlan hesitated as he asked himself. Benefactor, do you believe in destiny? Trust in karma? Another picture became clear in his heart. It was the first thing Great Master Wu Wei said to him when he met him in the Dongqing clan a few months ago. Destiny? Li Tianlan clenched the human emperor's halberd in his hand and laughed softly. His eyes became clear in his smile, and the clear or unclear memories in his heart began to dissipate rapidly. Blurring. Retreating. There aren't many of you left. He looked at Qing Shan and Fei Yu in front of him and finally said softly, after killing you, I should return to the team. You'd better stay. Silently, a low and cold voice rang out behind Li Tianlan. This voice seemed calm, but there was an extremely twisted rage in every single one of his words. Li Tianlan turned around. A middle-aged man who looked to be in his 40s quietly appeared in the forest. He stood in the void, but his powerful momentum had already soared into the sky, and his killing intent was awe-inspiring. This was a middle-aged man who looked very imposing. Like most people in East Island, he was very short, but he looked extremely well-proportioned. His tone was angry, but his expression was extremely calm. It was undisguised cruelty and indifference, which was close to inhumanity. The most important thing was that he was dressed in white. The white clothes shone with a soft luster in the dim jungle. They looked like robes, large and simple, but when the clothes fluttered occasionally, there was a metallic light flashing. Li Tianlan subconsciously looked at the silver clothes he was wearing. His silver clothes were completely torn, but the seemingly soft silver robe didn't turn into strands of cloth. Instead, it broke into pieces like armor. Li Tianlan remembered that the original appearance of the silver robe seemed to be very similar to the white robe the man was wearing. That's my brother's battle suit. It's integrated with soft alloy. I gave it to him. The middle-aged man seemed to know what Li Tianlan was thinking and said in a cold voice. Li Tianlan said, "Oh." He thought for a while and said, "This suit is good, but your brother can't take a beating." He took this suit from an expert of the thunder-shocking realm, and he didn't mean to humiliate him. That man was indeed too weak, and his head was pierced by a spear. He died miserably. You must pay the price. The eyes of the man in white gradually straightened, and his voice became colder and colder. He was Yue Kong, the first guardian of Wuji Palace, an expert of the half-step invincible realm, and also the commander-in-chief of the No. 6 Theater of Operations. Yue Kong was very confident about besieging Li Tianlan at the beginning. The No. 6 Theater of Operations was close to the edge of the battlefield, and it was also responsible for guarding against the 5 dark superpowers nearby. Although the people stationed here were not the strongest in each theater of operations, they could be said to be one of the strongest. There were 11 experts of the thunder-shocking realm, more than 100 experts of the fire-flaming realm, and hundreds of special warfare elites of the ice-condensing realm and below. With such a lineup, there was no possibility of failure to besiege a young man. But things changed dramatically from the very beginning. The unexpected death of Icebird and Black Shield directly shocked the entire No. 6 theater of operations. Especially Icebird, who was not only an expert at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, but also the exclusive property of Tianhai Wuji, the palace master of Wuji Palace. How could Yue Kong not be furious with such a loss? After getting the news, he didn't think carefully at all. In a rage, he directly sent a team of experts of the thunder-shocking realm to hunt Li Tianlan down again. But Li Tianlan's combat strength inexplicably soared to an unimaginable level. Obviously, he had only broken through 2 small realms, but the pressure he brought to others had multiplied. As expected, the second encirclement and suppression team was completely annihilated. The No. 6 theater of operations was on the verge of losing control in an instant. At this point, Yue Kong should have actively reported to the headquarters where Shinichi Miyamoto was, but he gave up the idea after thinking about it. He gritted his teeth and continued to send elites to encircle and suppress Li Tianlan. 3 waves of pursuing teams were killed by Li Tianlan. 8 of the 11 experts of the thunder-shocking realm died. Now in the No. 6 theater of operations, there were only 3 experts of the thunder-shocking realm: Yue Kong, Qing Shan, and Fei Yu. There were nearly 1,000 elites in the No. 6 theater of operations, but less than 1/10 of them survived. Shinichi Miyamoto and others were still paying close attention to the final battle in the front, but they still didn't know what happened in the No. 6 theater of operations. Now Yue Kong had already reached a dead end. The No. 6 theater of operations suffered such a heavy loss, but he kept it a secret, which was definitely a felony. But now he still had a chance to turn the tables. Li Tianlan had been seriously injured in many battles. Needless to say, he was valuable. As long as he could capture him, it was acceptable even if he had to pay the price of the entire No. 6 theater of operations. As long as he could capture Li Tianlan. Yue Kong's eyes were cold. This battle was related to his future and even his life. He had no way out. As long as Li Tianlan fell into his hands, the matter of the No. 6 theater of operations could be settled. Yue Kong took a deep breath and was about to speak. Li Tianlan took the initiative to speak. "Are all your people here?" His voice was soft, but with indescribable concentration and seriousness. Yue Kong was stunned for a moment. Dense footsteps began to sound from all directions. That was all the remaining elites in the No. 6 theater of operations. They were all mobilized by Yue Kong at once. In order to capture Li Tianlan and reverse his passive situation, he was desperate. The corner of Yue Kong's mouth moved, but Li Tianlan interrupted him again. "Then let's go." He took a light step forward. But with one step, he rushed up to the sky. The setting sun on the horizon had completely set. The moment darkness covered Chongdao, a silver light rose up in the forest. The bright moon was in the sky. The silver light spread like crazy, shaking the void sky. A large amount of fire waves appeared without any warning, like a vast sea of fire, covering everything. Li Tianlan was high in the sky, walking on the waves. The silver moon suddenly turned into a blazing sun. The light was boundless. This was Li Tianlan now. He found his true self. Yue Kong suddenly let out an extremely angry roar. He rushed up, passed through the sea of fire, and went straight to Li Tianlan. At the same time, in 2 different directions of the No. 6 theater of operations. The moment Yue Kong's roar spread through the forest, a man in black who had been lingering in the No. 6 theater of operations moved and rushed over. In another direction, a young man who seemed to be searching for something also stood up and stared at the battlefield. After a while, he sneered and rushed over without hesitation. They were fighting in gathering. Chapter 234. Blazing Fire. Scarlet Light. Killing intent all over the sky. The sky halberd was raised in the air, and the broken spearhead almost disappeared in the night. 2 gorgeous and complicated red spear blades cut through the night sky, becoming the most dazzling color. Raging flames rose from the void where the 2 scarlet streaks passed. They were clearly invisible flames, but at the moment of burning, they became tangible. The raging flames flew and gathered in the sky. The light of the flames was restrained, and the sparks were densely packed together, fluctuating up and down. The fire turned into water. It was like a river rushing and roaring in the void. It was like magma, a sea of fire, and a torrent. The magma-like flame spread straight in the air. Wherever it passed, the forest turned into powder, and the green grass turned into a desert. The most violent flame turned into the softest liquid. There was no doubt that this was the extreme of the fire-flaming realm. Yuekong's figure broke through the river made of magma above. The dazzling and demonic red light split the world in a wave of fire. With irresistible power and killing intent, it slashed horizontally. The river in the void suddenly became violent. Wisps of blue began to appear in the blazing waves of fire. They looked like flames, but also like lightning. The sky halberd was fully stretched, and the sharp sound came down from above, as if it was going to split the space. Yuekong's figure disappeared instantly. There were only a few drops of magma flowing down his white clothes in the air. The unique skill of Wuji Palace. Dark ambush. The ferocious slash landed on empty air. Li Tianlan suddenly raised his eyebrows, and the sharp killing intent soared into the sky in an instant. The killing intent whistled over the whole river, and waves of it rose one after another, endlessly. The sharp edge filled the whole space, stirring endlessly. It was like the shadow of the halberd, the sword light, and the saber aura. Li Tianlan's figure disappeared in the infinite edge, and he crossed dozens of meters in one step. The sound of the blade cutting through the air rang out. The sky halberd, which was more than 2 meters long, suddenly shook. Li Tianlan stood in the sky with his limbs fully stretched. The silver halberd was like thunder, suddenly shining a natural arc in the air. Sweeping. The wind and thunder veins in his body tightened. Extreme strength and speed were perfectly integrated, colliding with the saber light that suddenly appeared in the void. Suddenly, there was a loud sound of metal clashing in the dark night. Huge forces intertwined with each other, and the void suddenly spread into a visible wave of air. The space was collapsing, and the flame field high up in the sky exploded in an instant. Countless lightning and sparks fell from above, swirling in the air. Yuekong's furious roar suddenly became louder. The moment the two of them involuntarily retreated from the blast, he gripped the long saber in his hand and raised it above his head. It was only for an instant. Yuekong chopped down with his long saber. A dark blue saber light about 30 meters long slashed directly at Li Tianlan. The dark blue brilliance intertwined with each other, emitting crackling sounds in the air. This was a saber light, but it was more like a thunderbolt. Yuekong's figure sped up after he slashed with his saber. He gripped the meter-long saber tightly with both hands. Apart from the lightning, there was also a layer of strange green light on the shiny saber's blade. Tianhai Wuji, the palace master of Wuji Palace, was one of the strongest superiors of the invincible realm in East Island. Tianhai Wuji was from Jifeng Sword Training School, the oldest martial arts force in East Island. Jifeng Sword Training School specialized in swordsmanship. Their swords were now recognized as one of the sharpest and most violent swords in the Dark World. The martial arts of Jifeng Sword Training School pursued swordsmanship and emphasized on being faithful to the end. Even when one reached the invincible realm, he pursued swordsmanship instead of domain. As an invincible realm expert, without his own domain, he could only break the domain. Otherwise, how could he dare to call himself an invincible realm expert? The extreme of the Jifeng Sword Training School is to break through the domain. I have a sword that can shock the world even in the invincible domain. This was another way different from the invincible realm, which was to become a domain by oneself. The Wang family of Beihai and Zhuanyuantai were the best on this road, and they went further than Jifeng Sword Training School. Although Tianhai Wuji had founded the Limitless Palace, his martial Dao philosophy had not changed. He switched his sword to a saber, but he still didn't have a domain. He was also on the path of breaking through the domain. That was why there was the unique skill of the Limitless Palace, and Yuekong's landslide and ground cracking. Landslide and ground cracking. It was the strongest unique skill of the Limitless Palace. To some extent, this unconventional move was equal to the perfect combination of strength, speed, and willpower. The unique way of exerting force was about the most sustained outburst. One strike after another, the fastest, fiercest, swiftest, and most lethal. The moment the pale green saber light lit up in the air, Yuekong's figure suddenly flashed. The dim blue thunderbolt saber light was still moving forward. But Yuekong's figure was already keeping pace with the saber light. He and the saber light. In the blink of an eye, he appeared in front of Li Tianlan. Or in other words, he appeared in front of the sky halberd. Whistling and spinning. Li Tianlan's face did not change at all. Only a pair of calm and deep eyes shone brighter against the saber light. The heavy and sharp sky halberd suddenly spun in his hand. Straight thrust. He still did not use any unique skill. Forgetting. Simple straight thrust. Extreme straight thrust. No one could accurately describe Li Tianlan's state at this time. It was a kind of strength and confidence that could not be expressed in any words. Standing here, he was invincible. The invincible was invincible. He was indestructible, but there was nothing he could not break. He had no shortcomings. He was grand and perfect, like the light in the night, like the darkness in the morning. He was everywhere and different. The sky halberd passed through the dim blue saber light in a rapid vibration. The thunderbolt instantly exploded under the scouring of the liquid flame. The dazzling light and shadow swept past Li Tianlan and Yuekong with sharp edges. The light and shadow were dazzling. The human emperor and the long saber collided. The pale green and the dim blue intertwined. Li Tianlan suddenly became completely violent. There was no unique skill, only the most direct and domineering attack. The human emperor was less than 3 meters tall, but it seemed to reach the end of the sky in an instant. The silver halberd whistled wildly in the air. The silver halberd suddenly swayed in the air, leaving countless residual shadows. The residual shadows merged into one and spread again. Over and over again. The deafening sound kept ringing in the air like thunder. The hundreds of meters-long flame river in the air was completely boiling. The fire waves were monstrous, rising against the sky. Li Tianlan and Yuekong were falling. They kept falling. The two of them fought from the sky to the ground. The silver halberd was waved wildly, faster and faster. Silver residual shadows appeared in all directions. In the silver light, the pale green shadow was getting brighter and brighter. No retreat. Both Li Tianlan and Yuekong had tried their best, regardless of everything. Boom! The mountain forest turned into a desert. The moment the two of them landed on the ground, golden sand rose all over the sky. The boiling flame river completely lost control in the huge and fierce battle. The whole river collapsed from head to tail. It suddenly rained heavily in the desert at night. Fire rain. The high-temperature magma poured down from the sky unscrupulously, flying straight down in an endless stream. This kind of human condensed liquid flame was completely unprecedented. Even Fei Yu and Qing Shan, the two thunder-shocking realm experts who were ready to intervene at any time, were flustered, not to mention the ordinary elites. The fire rain lit up the sky, dense and dense. The few elites in the No. 6 theater of operations struggled and screamed in the fire rain, shrill and desperate. Yuekong still didn't give up. At this point of the battle, he was shocked and horrified, but he was more determined. Li Tianlan was very strong. In this state, he was so strong that it was incomprehensible. The young heavenly son with wind and thunder veins and top-notch inheritance was indeed terrifying. But Li Tianlan's real realm was only a half-step to the fire-flaming realm. Although it seemed that he took some medicine to forcibly raise his realm to the half-step thunder-shocking realm, the combat capability improved by the medicine couldn't compare with his own advancement at all. There was even a big gap between them. Yuekong was a half-step invincible realm expert himself, but now he felt suppressed by Li Tianlan in this state. It was incredible, and it made him frightened and confused. If Li Tianlan's real realm reached the half-step thunder-shocking realm, how terrifying would he be? Invincible below the invincible realm? The knife light slowed down, and the green light faded. The pain gradually spread from his hands to his chest, and then to his limbs. At the moment when he couldn't breathe, Yuekong showed a clear sneer at the corner of his mouth. The mountain fell and the earth cracked. This unique skill was extremely domineering. Both the lethality and the way of exerting force were fierce. Although Yuekong was a half-step invincible realm expert, he could only exert force for less than half a minute. After this time, he could maintain this state, but his lethality would decrease, and his body would gradually be damaged. However, although he was gradually losing strength, how good could Li Tianlan's state be? After 2 days and 2 nights of fighting, The number 6 theater of operations was almost wiped out because of him. Li Tianlan looked strong, but in fact, he was already seriously injured. In the next second he might fall down. Yue Kong had no reason not to hold on. He had no way out. After paying such a heavy price, his ending was already obvious. If he couldn't take down Li Tianlan, he would die. He had to die. On the contrary, if Li Tianlan fell into his hands, considering the loss of the number 6 theater of operations, he would at least not make a big mistake, even if he couldn't make a great contribution. So, take him down at all costs. Yue Kong's smile slowly faded, and his lips and teeth moved slightly. A medicine bag hidden in his mouth was gently crushed by him. Some liquid flowed into his mouth, and with a burning force, it went straight down his throat and into his stomach. It was sweet. He thought, it was like the sake brewed by the palace master himself. Yue Kong suddenly felt grateful to the Wang family of Beihai. For the entire East Island, the Wang family of Beihai was a nightmarish force, because the Wang family of Beihai occupied the land that belonged to East Island. It was like a thorn. For hundreds of years, several generations of Mikado died with grievances because of it. Not to mention that the Big Island, which was occupied by the royal family for hundreds of years and had an area of nearly 80,000 square kilometers, originally belonged to East Island. Even the other part of Beihai province at some time in history was also the territory of East Island. For the ownership of that land, East Island had negotiated with the Wang family of Beihai countless times in the past 100 years, and in different times they got different things. Most of the time they got humiliated. But in some special times, they also got some compensation. Although the compensation was rubbish for the Wang family of Beihai, it was very valuable for East Island. For example, the formula of some gene drugs. What Yue Kong was taking right now was one of the products of the trade between East Island and the Wang family of Beihai in recent years. The drug code name was Outbreak. Although he didn't know which generation it was, the effect was beyond doubt. It could stimulate the potential of the human body to the maximum and temporarily restore the combat capability of the peak period. Although the sequela seemed to be a bit serious, it was not the time to think about it now. The juice was sweet and felt like fire when it entered the stomach. The silver human emperor seemed to lock the world. Every time it waved, it had a suffocating power. Sweeping, chopping, stabbing, spinning, hooking, rolling, strangling. Dancing in the sky wind with the halberd. Every change of the sky halberd was exerted by Li Tianlan to the extreme. Right now, he didn't have any unique skills, but every move was a unique skill. Attack, attack, attack. The silver light flickered almost violently. It seemed to be completely disorderly, but every time the silver light flickered, one could clearly feel the almost majestic battle will that was filled with it. That was the real invincible will. A born god of war. When the slowing saber light flashed again, a thought crossed Yue Kong's mind. The ghastly green light instantly filled the desert. The yellow sand, the flame, and the silver light all disappeared in an instant. The ghastly green and blue completely filled everything. In the green light, the silver light with the scarlet blade of the halberd was still flying. Forward. Li Tianlan moved forward. Regardless of everything. The ghastly green saber light turned into shadows all over the sky. It fell on the sky halberd one after another. It was so fast and violent that it could topple mountains and overturn seas. Li Tianlan's figure was shaking, but he still moved forward. The human emperor stabbed forward. His pace was neither fast nor slow, but no one and nothing could stop him from moving forward. Everything could be broken. Determined, calm, and fearless. Yue Kong sneered. The saber light all over the sky suddenly stopped, and his figure suddenly disappeared in the void. Only the sound of the saber blade cutting through the void kept ringing. The saber light disappeared. The human emperor stabbed forward almost still, and the strong flame shone on Li Tianlan's face. He pressed his lips tightly, and his face was as pale as a dead man's. But the human emperor was still determined. The forward stab turned into a sweep. All the air in the vicinity suddenly twisted. The heavenly halberd swept across the void, and a vast and boundless sword intent instantly spread out in all directions. The sword intent flew 100 meters. The sand was flying, and blood was splashing. The sword energy crossed the forest from the desert, and a large number of giant trees rumbled and finally exploded. The ghastly green saber light appeared as soon as the sword energy swept through, and in the blink of an eye, it had already reached Li Tianlan. The speed was like a flash. Li Tianlan's figure also flashed. Shadow formula. Switch. 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 Li Tianlan's figure disappeared 3 times. The sky halberd in his hand flashed with silver flowing light. Yue Kong only felt dizzy, and then Li Tianlan's figure had appeared beside him. The distance was less than 1 meter. The huge sky halberd had disappeared from his hand. There was still silver light in Li Tianlan's hand. A silver dagger? The human emperor stab. The dagger form of the human emperor. The silver light flickered slightly. Yue Kong saw Li Tianlan's eyes. Those emotionless eyes. He suddenly felt a little cold in his heart, and his scalp was numb. For a strong attacker like Li Tianlan, who was not good at defense, once he used the dagger to get close, what followed was bound to be an almost earth-shattering blow. Yue Kong didn't even think about it. He tightened his body and retreated at full speed. That silver dagger had already been silently raised. The sound of it cutting through the wind and the air was silent. Yue Kong seemed to have an illusion. The saber light of the dagger was still behind him, but the blade had already reached Yue Kong's chest. Yue Kong had already taken half a step back in advance. The blade tore the skin on his chest, and blood flew. The blade cut back. Yue Kong twisted his body with all his strength. The sharp dagger stabbed into his shoulder. As Li Tianlan's arm slid lightly, Yue Kong's entire arm, along with the long saber in his hand, fell to the ground at the same time. Yue Kong's face instantly twisted to the extreme, but he couldn't even scream, or he couldn't care. Run! He turned around and ran away without hesitation. But the distance between them was too close. One moved forward and the other retreated. Although the distance between them was a little wider, he couldn't outrun Human Emperor. The delicate dagger stretched out instantly, and the 2-meter-long sky halberd directly stabbed into Yue Kong's chest. Blood spurted from the broken arm and chest at the same time. Yue Kong opened his eyes subconsciously and reached out to hold the sky halberd tightly. The blade had already stabbed into his chest, and it was only a millimeter away from his heart. Yue Kong held the halberd tightly, and his eyes were wide open. His eyes were full of fear and pleading. He didn't want to die. But he had to die. Li Tianlan held the long halberd tightly with one hand, stabbed forward, and walked forward. He was getting faster and faster, and Yue Kong's entire body was pushed backward rapidly. Li Tianlan's eyes were as calm as ever. But the footprints left on the desert were getting deeper and deeper. Yue Kong could only retreat. Moving forward became sprinting. Li Tianlan held the Human Emperor tightly and went straight forward. He rushed through the desert. He entered the forest. Li Tianlan rushed all the way. The Human Emperor pushed against Yue Kong's body, and the trees were completely smashed by Yue Kong's body. The forest roared. Li Tianlan was determined to kill, and Yue Kong didn't give up. They entered the No. 6 headquarters from the forest. As they advanced and retreated, they directly drew a straight line several kilometers long on the battlefield. Yue Kong still held the Human Emperor tightly and didn't let it go forward, but his eyes were getting dimmer and dimmer. Boom! The Human Emperor pushed against Yue Kong's body and smashed the iron gate of the No. 6 headquarters, and then smashed a rockery used as a bunker. They kept moving forward. The two crashed into a bluestone house that looked a little old. They broke through the wall and rushed out from the other side. Rocks were flying, and smoke and dust were scattered. Yue Kong, whose bones were almost broken, finally had no strength to hold on to the Human Emperor. With a dull sound, the Human Emperor pushed against Yue Kong's body and directly pierced into a huge bluestone behind the house. Yue Kong's body was directly nailed to the bluestone in the air. Blood was flowing. Li Tianlan held the Human Emperor tightly, but his arms were shaking uncontrollably. Puff! He spat out a mouthful of blood, and then a large amount of blood mist burst out of his body. Li Tianlan was in a trance, and his pupils began to dilate. Light footsteps sounded behind him. Stepping over the smashed ruins, the sound was soft, but it didn't mean to hide it at all. Li Tianlan held the Human Emperor tightly in his hand. It was more like holding it than holding it. He turned around and stood up straight. Everything in front of him was blurred and spinning. More than 10 meters away, a human figure stood there. He couldn't tell whether it was a man or a woman, tall or short. Everything was blurred. He was looking at him, but he couldn't see anything. He was also looking at him, and it seemed that he also had a lot of uncertainties. Oh, Yuekong is dead. After a moment of silence, he looked at Yuekong, who was nailed to the blue stone, and said softly. His tone was calm and even a little elegant. Li Tianlan didn't know what he was going to do, but at least he knew it was a man, and it sounded like a relatively young man. He nodded and answered faintly, Yes, he's dead. This person was useful to me, but it's a pity that he's dead. The words of the blurry young man sounded a little boring. Li Tianlan tried his best to calm the raging blood in his body and didn't speak. Yuekong is dead, but it's good that you're alive. The young man seemed to smile, and his tone was very serious. I can't catch Yuekong, so how about you go back with me? Go back? Li Tianlan asked. Yes, the young man said. You're also of great use to me. According to the original plan, I shouldn't show up now, but I don't want to wait. It's better for you to die earlier than later. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. His breath was extremely weak, but with the movement of raising his eyebrows, he looked indescribably cool and arrogant. You are? I'm Jiang Hongwei. The young man in front of him smiled and said, My code name is Di Jiang. Chapter 235. Li Tianlan closed his eyes. The battle stopped, and the echo dissipated. The headquarters of the No. 6 Theater of Operations was in a mess, but it was extremely quiet. Standing in front of Li Tianlan, Di Jiang's eyebrows moved. He seemed to find it interesting, and the corners of his mouth were slightly raised, showing a smile that was not kind but not indifferent. The boiling blood in his body calmed down. Li Tianlan's face grew paler and paler, and even gradually revealed a kind of bluish-gray. He opened his eyes. His blurred vision finally became clear again, and the young man in front of him was clearly reflected in his sight. This was a young man with a perfect figure, nearly 1.9 meters tall, with an ape's back and a wasp's waist. Although his appearance looked gentle, as he raised the corners of his mouth, there was a trace of primitive wildness in his whole person. The most noticeable thing was that his arms were very long, and when they hung down naturally, they almost touched his knees. From the perspective of the opposite sex, this was undoubtedly a very attractive, even fatally attractive man. But looking at him, what Li Tianlan felt was power. Extreme power. But his code name was Di Jiang. Di Jiang's name first appeared in the wonderful book classic of Mountains and Seas. He was one of the ancestors of Wizard in the myths and legends of Zhongzhou State, known to be extremely fast. He was full of power, but had such a weird code name. Even a fool would not think that his power and speed were in a state of imbalance. Li Tianlan said, I don't understand what you mean. It's very simple. Di Jiang looked at Li Tianlan calmly, but in Li Tianlan's mind, he felt that he had been firmly locked by him. It will be very difficult for me to kill you here. Everything will be easy after I take you back. I won't go. Li Tianlan said lightly. His voice was very light, but the absolutely condensed will was with coldness and determination that could break the world. Di Jiang said, Oh, and made a move in an instant. His movement seemed not fast, but the two were more than 10 meters apart, and his arm directly covered Li Tianlan's shoulder at the first time. He was fast. Li Tianlan was faster. The moment his palm covered his shoulder, his body seemed to shake slightly, and he took a seemingly careless step forward to the left. One step was less than half a meter. But he narrowly brushed Di Jiang's palm and avoided it. Di Jiang's palm fell. Lightning flashed silently, and a palm-shaped palm print appeared on the ground. The palm print sank deep into the ground, leaving a palm-shaped hole in the ground. The power spread underground. There was a loud rumble. The wreckage within a radius of dozens of meters in the command center was instantly shattered. The house, the giant rock, and Yuekong's corpse were all turned into dust by the unparalleled power. The sky-piercing halberd fell to the ground. Li Tianlan casually waved his hand and held the sky halberd in his hand. Di Jiang looked at Li Tianlan with a smile on his face, and said thoughtfully, Interesting. Is this night walking? Li Tianlan's eyes narrowed tightly. Rays of sharpness began to flash from his eyes, frantic and swift. Since he came to Changdao, This was the first time he felt such a great and even fatal danger. Di Jiang's smile was calm and almost gentle, but it was just a facade. This kind of calmness was completely a display of not taking anything to heart. He was unbridled and fearless. His every move was filled with extreme confidence. Night walking is said to be one of the most wonderful body movements in the dark world. The desperate chase of Sai City and the shadow formula of tribulation are both branches of night walking. The inheritance of Zhuanyuantai is indeed unparalleled, broad and profound. Take night walking for example. Everyone knows that this body movement is fast, but is it speed? Or reaction? Boom! Li Tianlan's pupils suddenly contracted, and he didn't hesitate anymore. The two of them were only 1 or 2 meters away from each other. He jumped directly into the sky, and the sky-piercing halberd drew a blazing wave of fire in the night sky. The human emperor chopped down with all his strength from above. Night walking. It was one of the most mysterious unique skills in the map of God of War, which belonged to the Invincible Manual. For hundreds of years, Li Tianlan was the only one who practiced the Invincible Manual. Although the Invincible Realm Warriors of the Li family could also learn some unique skills from the Invincible Manual, they didn't understand it as thoroughly as those who specialized in the Invincible Manual. That was why there were some specious unique skills. Night walking could be said to be a legendary unique skill, and in the legend, this set of body movement was fast. But was it fast or reaction? That was the essence of the technique. The silver human emperor fell from the sky, and an extreme sharpness cut the space in the wave of fire, followed by the silver shadow chopping down wildly. Bang! The human emperor chopped down solidly and hit the target. But it didn't hit Di Jiang's head. Di Jiang raised his hand expressionlessly. His palm went over the blade of the spear and held the body of the halberd tightly. The scarlet and complicated blade of the spear was only dozens of centimeters away from his forehead, but it couldn't go any further. Power. Once again, Li Tianlan felt the steady surging and almost unimaginable power. Too tender, Di Jiang said, and his arm suddenly shook. The great power passed directly to Li Tianlan through the human emperor. Puff! Li Tianlan's whole body burst into a mist of blood, and a mouthful of blood gushed out of his mouth. Come down, Di Jiang said. He pulled down his arm, and Li Tianlan, who was in the air, was almost pulled down without any resistance. His body began to fall. Di Jiang held the human emperor weighing more than 50 kilograms in one hand, as light as a feather, and stretched out the other hand, trying to grab Li Tianlan's body. The air nearby was slightly twisted. A palm stretched out without any warning. It was a slender palm with slightly curved knuckles with thick calluses, and 5 fingers bent like a goshawk. Di Jiang's face changed slightly, and a trace of killing intent suddenly appeared in his indifferent eyes. Get out! He suddenly opened his mouth, clenched his open palm into a fist, and hit the air. In an instant, the whole dark sky directly turned into a dazzling deep blue. Di Jiang's entire figure abruptly turned into a dark blue ball of light, countless bolts of lightning exploding from his body without restraint. The sky and the earth were all deep blue in an instant. The loud rumbling sound spread unscrupulously in the whole forest. The wildly expanding lightning swept through the forest hundreds of meters around in an instant. Smash! Wherever the lightning passed, all tangible things within 100 meters were completely turned into nothingness. The power of one punch could destroy the world. But Di Jiang's face was still gloomy. The moment the lightning burst out, he clearly saw that the palm that suddenly appeared also clenched into a fist. Their fists retracted as soon as they touched, and the next second, Li Tianlan's body had been grabbed by that palm. The man in black who suddenly appeared snatched Li Tianlan away. Di Jiang held the human emperor in his hand. His eyes became cold and wild in an instant. He swept his eyes and looked directly in front of him. A thin black figure stood there quietly, with a black cloak covering his whole body. He carefully put Li Tianlan on the ground. Before Di Jiang could speak, he reached out, pointed at the human emperor in Di Jiang's hand, and said lightly, "Give it to me." That was the palm with which he had just punched Di Jiang. There was blood on the palm, and even some white bones had been exposed. Di Jiang's eyes were as cold as a knife. After a few seconds of silence, he sneered and said, "Good, very good. You snatched my prey, and now you dare to ask me for something? Not bad. Not bad at all." He lifted his foot and stamped hard on the ground. Boom! A dull sound suddenly rose. Thunder and lightning suddenly rose. The whole earth shook violently in the unparalleled power, and one after another startling cracks began to extend on the earth. A dim blue light beam from the ground to the highest point of the sky suddenly became extremely bright. The light beam surged and spread to dozens of meters away, completely covering Li Tianlan and the man in black. The dim blue light was entangled wildly. A sword light suddenly rose in the light beam, tearing the night curtain and smashing the thunder and lightning. The sword light roared in the light curtain, and the vast expanse of dim blue did not cover the black figure. He stood in the endless dim blue thunder and lightning, motionless like a mountain. The sword light and the thunder and lightning dissipated silently. Di Jiang stood where he was, expressionless. The black clothes on the man in black had been broken in large areas. He held the sword in one hand, and the blood flowed faster and faster on the palm of the hand holding the sword. Li Tianlan's consciousness gradually blurred, and he finally passed out. No wonder you have the double thunder veins. Your attack is really earth-shattering. But you want to kill the successor of the Li family in your first battle. Zhang Hongwei. Is this the will of your master? The man in black glanced at Li Tianlan, and his tone suddenly became cold. Di Jiang's face became more serious, and he solemnly said, "Do you know me?" He was the only disciple of Wang Tianzong, but he had never fought. In recent years, he had been in charge of the research institute in North America. This was the first time he fought, but his identity was seen through at a glance. Di Jiang narrowed his eyes and stared at the man in black in front of him. He said flatly, "Who are you?" "Samsara. Saint." Saint took a step forward and protected Li Tianlan behind him. He said coldly, "Give it to me." His black robe was broken, and there was blood not only on his hands but also on his body. But his momentum was getting sharper. "Oh, Saint, I've heard of you." Di Jiang nodded. The most mysterious supermaster in Samsara Palace, and also the most unworthy first supermaster, is you, right? Saint did not speak. "You are no match for me." Di Jiang continued. "I'll give you a chance. Leave Li Tianlan and get out of here. If you dare to stay, not to mention you can't protect him, even you have to stay. I'm curious what kind of face you have under the cloak. How dare you call yourself Saint? Ridiculous." Saint was still silent, but the sword energy on him was getting sharper. But it was just pure sword intent. He knew why Di Jiang said he didn't live up to his name. During the years when Samsara was active in the Dark World, the 12 Supermasters were famous, but Saint's battle record was not so earth-shattering. But his name was always listed side by side with Gong Sun Qi and Tribulation. As for his real strength, no one knew. Occasionally, he fought a few times, but under the circumstances that people could see, he did not show the strength of a top superior of the half-step invincible realm. Maybe he didn't live up to his name? Saint lowered his head and rubbed the long sword in his hand. It was a very ordinary long sword, as clear as water, but the material was ordinary. "Why don't you get out?" Di Jiang's smile gradually became cruel. "If I turn around, what awaits me may be a fatal blow. And you are not qualified to ask me to get out. It's better for your master to come." Saint said blandly. "How arrogant you are." Di Jiang smiled casually. "You are so arrogant. I'd like to see what kind of person you are." His figure suddenly disappeared on the spot. He had the double thunder veins, but he didn't feel clumsy at all. His figure flashed, and the distance between him and Saint was instantly shortened. Saint knew that this was not the so-called speed. This was the explosive power. The extreme explosive power. The lightning that was so dazzling that it could almost blind people rose up from the ground. In the sky filled with deep blue, there was a silver waterfall that flew straight down 300,000 feet. Human Emperor. The sky halberd, which was more than 2 meters long, suddenly burst out an incredible power in Di Jiang's hand. The silver halberd cut through the sky, and the vast and irresistible power poured down without any scruples. The unique technique of the Wang family of Beihai. The tribulation of 1,000 years. This was the move known as the extreme force. In an instant, the pure power pushed the explosive power to the peak, and the destructive power had no end. This was the move that was most suitable for Di Jiang. The sky halberd danced crazily, and the silver light turned from the waterfall to the river, to the sea, surging endlessly. The tribulation of 1,000 years. 1,000 strikes were all chopped down in the shortest time, and each strike was heavier than the previous one. The sound of weapons colliding suddenly echoed in the sky, suppressing the thunder. In front of Saint, there was all the sword light. But the sword light began to shake violently under the impact of the silver light. The sword light was on the verge of collapse, and the light was getting dimmer. The light was shrinking extremely, getting dimmer and dimmer. Only the silver sea in the sky was still mighty, getting crazier and crazier. Crack! The long sword in Saint's hand instantly exploded under the silver light. The tribulation of 1,000 years was just half over, and the dim sword light was almost completely extinguished in an instant. Saint's whole body was submerged in the silver light, shaking violently. The moment the sword light died, the sword intent was born. The sword energy and the sword intent rose at the same time. The extinguished sword light broke through the suppression of the silver light, and began to expand to the limit. It was like a rebirth in the fire. There was no sword in Saint's hand, but the bright sword light suddenly shone to the extreme. "It's you?" Di Jiang's tone showed a trace of disbelief for the first time, and he was so shocked that he was almost at a loss. The tribulation of 1,000 years fell crazily. The silver light crisscrossed the sky, one after another. But the reignited sword light was still stable. Saint was retreating, but the visible light was never extinguished. The tribulation of 1,000 years was almost over in an instant. Di Jiang's figure stepped back a few steps, looked at Saint, and laughed. "I didn't expect it to be you. According to the seniority, I should call you nice, but do you deserve it?" "Haha, you are really a big shot. You are willing to be a running dog? Saint, do you deserve it? Do you deserve it?" Saint's eyes were cold and he did not move. "You are old." Di Jiang took a step forward and said indifferently, "Today I must take Li Tianlan away. Similarly, you should also come with me to Mount Dibbing as a guest." He raised the sky halberd in his hand, but as soon as he took a step forward, his face suddenly changed. In the night sky that was neither too far nor too near, an extremely swift and fierce killing intent instantly pierced through the air, getting closer and closer. Between heaven and earth, there was a crazy killing intent everywhere. Di Jiang's face changed, and under the stimulation of the killing intent, he was uncertain. "Why don't you do it? I am still waiting to go with you to Mount Dibbing as a guest." Saint finally spoke in a sarcastic tone. Di Jiang snorted coldly, glanced at Saint with killing intent, and then looked at Li Tianlan. He held the human emperor in his hand, and without hesitation, he turned around and left. He did not know who was approaching the battlefield, but he was sure that this person was not weaker than Saint. He was not weaker than the real Saint. Saint hesitated for a moment, and let Di Jiang disappear with the human emperor. He turned around and looked at Li Tianlan. Di Jiang did not look back, but rushed through the battlefield, rushed through the desert, and kept retreating. The distance of a few kilometers was instantly left behind by him. His rushing figure suddenly stopped, and his face was strange. In front of him was still a dense forest. But in the forest at night, in silence, there was a perfect and dreamy figure standing quietly under the tree. Beside her stood a man in black. He did not say a word, but his whole body was filled with battle intent. At this moment, Di Jiang subconsciously ignored the great enemy beside the woman. All he could see was a pair of eyes as bright as the Milky Way. Under the night, Qin Wei Bai stood quietly, with military counselor beside her. The night wind blew her long hair, and her eyebrows were picturesque. Chapter 236. The darkness was as deep as a curtain. Di Jiang's figure cut through the night and went away quickly with the whistling wind. The silver light was getting farther and farther away, but the sharp killing intent in the distant sky was getting closer and closer. The killing intent wasn't manic or arrogant, but it filled the whole space with extreme coldness. It was calm, indifferent, and extremely dangerous. Li Tianlan had fainted. Saint felt his pulse and heartbeat and was slightly relieved. The No. 6 theater of operations that East Island divided was neither too big nor too small. But in 2 days, Saint couldn't find Li Tianlan. It was partly because of the size of the No. 6 theater of operations, and partly because Li Tianlan was too fast. There was no nonsense in a high-intensity battle. Fight, fight, life and death, retreat. Li Tianlan's every move was clean and neat, and Saint was often one step slower than him. At first it was like this. But through some remaining clues, Saint could gradually see that Li Tianlan's strength had broken through to a rather terrifying level. Then he wasn't in a hurry and kept following him unhurriedly. But he didn't expect that Li Tianlan would meet Di Jiang at the end of the battle. If he came one step later, Saint didn't dare to think about the consequences. But even so, he still let Di Jiang take away the valuable human emperor. At this moment, looking at Li Tianlan who was in a coma, Saint suddenly felt a little embarrassed. The crazy killing intent in the air suddenly stopped at a moment. The night sky suddenly became clear. The killing intent all over the battlefield silently turned into an almost completely transparent shadow. The shadow fluctuated violently in the night, and then turned into a black shadow. The killing intent had completely disappeared. The place where the black shadow stood was a void. Saint furrowed his brows as if he was thinking about something. "How is it?" Tribulation, who rushed to the battlefield, asked in a hoarse voice. He and Saint were both dressed in black, but their temperaments were completely different. Saint's inadvertent every move seemed to have a torrential sword chi, but the Tribulation was silent. Everywhere it passed, there was only mystery and endless darkness. "He's seriously injured and too tired." Saint picked up Li Tianlan and handed him to Tribulation. After a moment of silence, he continued, "The human emperor is lost." Tribulation uttered a simple syllable. "It's Zhang Hongwei. You came a step too late. Otherwise, you might have been able to keep him here." Saint sighed regretfully, but there was an inexplicable brilliance flickering in his eyes. He recalled the moment of the fight and the lightning that pierced through the sky. He laughed at himself and thought that Yi Fuqian was indeed a terrifying junior. The double thunder veins of the Wang family of Beihai? Tribulation's tone was calm. The Zhang family of Beihai province was a well-known wealthy family. The identity of the heir of the Zhang family and the personal disciple of Wang Tianzong could not be a complete secret. Although Zhang Hongwei, who had double thunder veins, had never shown his strength, some big shots in Zhongzhou state would have a rough judgment. If he could grow up normally, even if he didn't enter the invincible realm, he would basically have the combat capability of the invincible realm. In the Wang family of Beihai, he was the real second expert. "You shouldn't be a match for him," Tribulation said in a clear and straightforward tone. "Saint is indeed no match for him. But I'm not just a saint." Saint shook his head and said in a complicated tone, "He knows your identity." Tribulation's tone was indifferent, but both of them were very clear about the trouble contained in this sentence. The relationship between Samsara Palace and Sai City had been established since Saint climbed Mount Tai Bai for the first time. If Zhang Hongwei exposed Saint's real identity, the uproar would be enough to make the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City completely vigilant. Saint took a deep breath and said blandly, "There's no other way. If I don't draw my sword tonight, I can't stop him, and then Tianlan will be in danger." He was the first supermaster of Samsara, but the strength that Saint could show was really ordinary, roughly between the ordinary half-step invincible realm and the peak of the half-step invincible realm. There was only sword energy without sword intent, which meant that the sword had no soul. But once the sword intent appeared, it was all trouble. Tribulation held Li Tianlan in his arms, took out a bottle of blue medicine, and gave it to him. He was silent for a while. Whoosh! The silver light in the darkness cut through the night sky in an instant. The silver light was like a meteor, with a terrible momentum but no killing intent. The sharp edge fell at Tribulation's feet. A figure in a black cloak came out from the other side and said in a gentle voice, "It's all right." The human emperor that was taken away by Di Jiang was still in the shape of a sky halberd. At this time, it was stuck in the ground in front of Tribulation, trembling slightly. "Military counselor?" Tribulation's whole face was hidden under the mask, and he raised his eyebrows calmly. "Nice to meet you," Military counselor said with a smile in his voice. He cupped his hands and didn't say anything about meeting for the first time. They had already met at the meeting a few days ago, although they didn't communicate. Tribulation nodded, looked at the human emperor in front of him, narrowed his eyes, and said with some confusion, "This is..." I reasoned with the little guy named Di Jiang. Maybe he felt he was in the wrong. That guy left his weapon and left. Military counselor chuckled softly, gentle and gentle without any sharpness. "You?" Tribulation asked in reply. I can't do it myself, but I have you guys. Anyway, the distance is not far. I can't reason with him, but the three of us can't reason with him. That little fellow is a smart person. He's very sensible. Military counselor glanced at Saint with a smile and continued, You don't have to worry about your identity. Saint seemed to understand something, and then he frowned. His eyes changed, and he winked at military counselor. Military counselor nodded knowingly and turned to leave. I know Saint's identity. What about you? Who are you? Feeling Li Tianlan's breathing getting steadier and steadier, Tribulation looked at military counselor's back and suddenly asked. Military counselor's figure paused, and then he hurried into the darkness again, as if he was in a hurry. His voice drifted through the night sky and was clear to everyone's ears. I am military counselor. I am also the hand that holds the saber in samsara. His figure disappeared, and he seemed to be in a hurry. Tribulation's pupils suddenly condensed. He silently looked at the direction where military counselor left. After a long time, he turned to look at military counselor and said in a low voice, Does the saber really exist? Saber. Invisible saber. A saber that was hard to be perceived. In Zhongzhou State, only a few people could perceive the existence of this saber, but it was vague. Not to mention Tribulation, even Wang Tianzong and Gu Xingyun didn't know what the so-called saber was. Of course it exists, Saint said blandly, but not for a long time. Tribulation took a deep breath, looked at Saint seriously and asked, Military counselor is the hand that holds the saber, then who is the saber holder? Is it the master of Samsara Palace? It used to be the boss. Saint hesitated but still told the truth. When Tianlan returns, it will be Tianlan who holds the saber. He may never imagine what kind of saber the boss left for him in Zhongzhou State. I can't imagine it either. Tribulation's tone was as calm as water. It seems that Boss Qin has made up her mind. The gift she left is indeed valuable, but it may not be what Tianlan wants. But it's what he needs most. Because he is in Zhongzhou State. Saint's tone was indifferent. Tribulation stopped talking. He had never been good at emotional affairs. There was always a choice between sensibility and rationality. Qin Weibai made a choice. What about Li Tianlan? He looked at Li Tianlan, who was still in a coma, and said with a self-mocking smile, I didn't expect the legendary saber to really exist. So what have the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City been doing for so many years? What's the point of what they have done? Saint didn't speak, just turned around silently, and said blandly, Let's go. There's still something to do. Tribulation didn't say more. He held Li Tianlan and disappeared instantly. On the other side of the battlefield. Military counselor's figure was rushing through the forest, without any reserve of strength. Trees flashed behind him. Suddenly, his figure suddenly stopped where it was. The stifling heat was brewing in the mountain forest, bringing with it a despairing silence. Military counselor's figure slowly moved forward, one step after another. His body stopped under a big tree. Military counselor was silent, but his eyes suddenly became extremely crazy and fierce. Here. It was the place where he and the boss separated. Before they separated, the boss was resting under the tree. But now, the tree was still. The boss was gone. Lin En, Zhongzhou State. The white mist in Mount Qingyun still hadn't dissipated. The white mist enveloped every corner of the mountain, and it was so thick that it couldn't be dispersed. The white mist flowed clearly and slowly in the night. Great Master Wu Wei, the most famous metaphysics grandmaster in Zhongzhou State, stood quietly in front of the gate of the temple. He lowered his head with a smile on his face and looked at the flourishing flowers in front of the temple gate. Large patches of flowers had now completely covered all the roads in the temple. The ancient temple, the white mist, and the flourishing flowers were everything. A drop of red blood flowed down from Great Master Wu Wei's chest and dripped into the flowers. The old monk, whose white hair had completely disappeared, suddenly touched his bald head and looked at the night sky. The sky was still filled with white mist, and it was as ethereal as a fairyland. Drops of water were falling from the sky, penetrating the white mist and moistening the flowers and plants. It's raining, he murmured softly, opened his mouth but closed it again. The master was going to ask his two disciples to enjoy the rain together, but when the words came to his mouth, he remembered that his two disciples, Ruzhen and Rui, had been arranged to go to East Island by him. He sighed softly, turned around, and walked slowly into the gate of the temple. Another drop of blood flowed down from his chest. The drop of blood fell to the ground and splashed. The rain was getting heavier. Chongdao International Airport. Two middle-aged monks with the same appearance, figure, and temperament slowly walked out of the hall. Both of them were dressed in simple monk robes, and their expressions were peaceful and quiet. The two monks who had been walking side by side came out of the hall in silence. They looked at each other and turned around without saying a word. One went to the east, and the other went to the west. They went further and further away. The dull night sky suddenly rumbled with muffled thunder. The dense lightning cut through the night sky before the thunder, falling from above. In an instant, the heavy rain fell on Chongdao with thunder and lightning and strong wind. The stuffy heat of Chongdao faded away. The overwhelming torrential rain suppressed everything. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.